At 800 points lower after the Fed cut rates by 0.5% today. That wraps up the hour for me. Be sure to stick with MSNBC for today's Super Tuesday coverage. We'll be on all night, bringing you exit polling and primary results. I'll be back at 2 a.m. Eastern. Thank you for watching. Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace begins now.
Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York on this Super Tuesday, just hours away from the polls closing on what will likely be the biggest night of the Democratic primary race so far, with more than a third of the delegates required to win the nomination up for grabs in a race that looks dramatically different today than even one day ago. Support for Joe Biden has skyrocketed in national polling, up 10 points since Sunday in a new Morning Consult poll. Biden reclaiming a significant national lead against Bernie Sanders, who remains the frontrunner in the most important of the largest Super Tuesday states. That Biden surge may be the culmination of an overnight influx of energy, urgency, and support for the former vice president in the form of zero-hour endorsements from Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar after they suddenly suspended their campaigns. Plus, support from another former presidential candidate, Texas's own Beto O'Rourke, and dozens of other prominent Democratic endorsements, all coming in the last 24 hours leading up to the Super Tuesday vote. Coming together today to turn up the volume on a rallying cry that Joe Biden offers Democrats the best chance to defeat Trump.
It is up to us, all of us, to put our country back together, to heal this country, and then to build something even greater. I believe we can do this together. And that is why today I am ending my campaign and endorsing Joe Biden for president.
We need somebody who can bring us together and heal us. We need somebody who can reestablish the moral authority of the United States. We need somebody who will fight for democracy here and abroad, because democracy is under attack here and abroad. We need Joe Biden.
The whole idea was about rallying the country together to defeat Donald Trump and to win the era for the values that we share. And that was always a goal that was much bigger than me becoming president. And it is in the name of that very same goal that I'm delighted to endorse and support Joe Biden for president.
That groundswell of support helping to reinforce the Biden campaign's narrative that the Democratic primary is quickly becoming a two-man race between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Sanders' candidacy has taken a more direct route toward frontrunner status by winning 2 of the 3 first contests. And that's despite Mike Bloomberg appearing on ballots for the very first time just today, the first test of his $500 million in ad spending. Elizabeth Warren is still on the campaign trail full-time, making her case to voters and holding out hope for a revival. But the renewed confidence from the establishment in Biden's candidacy has as much to do with its angst about Bernie Sanders' electability and capacity for widening his base of support in November as it does genuine enthusiasm for Biden's campaign. The New York Times today pulls back the curtain on some of the apprehension leading up to this moment. Quote, interviews with more than 100 Democratic elected officials, campaign strategists, union leaders, and donors revealed a party establishment that spent many months distressed about the implications of nominating Mr. Sanders, but frozen in a state of anxiety over who would be the best alternative. Many of the most influential officials, organizations, and donors in the party remain torn about their concerns about Mr. Sanders' chances in the general election. Their fear of antagonizing his supporters and the belated and often rueful recognition that he's assembled a political movement with appeal well beyond the youthful left-wing base he built in 2016. But it's all that burning anxiety that Sanders is seizing on in the hours before the polls close. It's proof, he says, of his campaign's strength and the force of his base.
Are you concerned about the moderates consolidating behind Joe Biden?
Look, it is no secret, I mean, the Washington Post has 16 articles a day on this, that there is a massive effort trying to stop Bernie Sanders. That's not a secret to anybody in this room. The corporate establishment is coming together, the political establishment is coming together, and they will do everything. They are really getting nervous that working people are standing up.
And the battle over Super Tuesdays, where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us at the table, Karine Jean-Pierre, Chief Public Affairs Officer for MoveOn.org. NBC and MSNBC National Affairs Analyst John Heilman is back at the table in New York. We're glad to see you back, my friend.
Hi.
Hi. Plus, former Republican strategist Steve Schmidt is back out in the field for us. NBC News political reporter Shaq Brewster, live from Burlington, Vermont, following the Sanders campaign, of course. And in Los Angeles, outside Biden headquarters, NBC News political reporter Mike Memley. Karine, I do want to start with you, though, with a question. I understand that in the Democratic primary, it is shaping up to be a dynamic where Bernie is both the victim of and the beneficiary of the optics of an establishment. But the truth is, it's African-American voters in South Carolina that are the reason that Joe Biden is in this race. It has nothing to do with the establishment. The establishment would have thrown Joe Biden overboard if Pete Buttigieg had gotten the bounce that people usually get when they win Iowa, if someone else had sort of started winning. I mean, Joe Biden isn't in the position he's in today because of the establishment. They, behind his back, literally would have happily and readily thrown him overboard. He's in this position because African-American voters came out in, I think, 2008-like numbers for him in the state of South Carolina.
So black voters basically in South Carolina took out 3 candidates. That's what we saw. They took out Tom Steyer, Amy Klobuchar, and Pete Buttigieg. That's what they did. And they made themselves very loud and clear. It was really the first time that black voters were majority of the Democratic electorate. In Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada, they were about 6%. And they made themselves really clear on what they wanted and who they were looking at. Here's the thing with Bernie Sanders. He has been running for the past 5 years. He has to be able to show that he can expand his base. Right now, it is mostly white and young, and he has to do more. He has to be able to do that. With Joe Biden, we have to see, was it just a one-off, right? South Carolina, with the help of Jim Clyburn. We gotta also not forget Jim Clyburn. That really helped him going out there and endorsing Joe Biden. So was this a one-off for Biden? Does the momentum really exist? The Joe-mentum that they're calling it? And we'll see. This is what the most big important thing tonight is. We'll see what happens.
Mike Memley, I started with Karine because I do feel like the Biden campaign is letting this narrative about an establishment first of all, the existence of an establishment, in my experience in Republican politics, is highly overstated. The power of an establishment is also highly overstated, and that has anything to do with where he stands today really doesn't feel like the right answer. He's where he is because African-American voters, and Karine's right, at the very passionate recommendation of Jim Clyburn, came out in 2008-like numbers, out sort of expanding the vote way beyond 2016 levels for Joe Biden.
Yeah, the Biden campaign has always believed that we in the media and left-leaning Twitter has never gotten this primary dynamic right, that the Democratic Party is much more in the Joe Biden lane than in the Bernie Sanders lane. And in part, that's because the African-American demographics tend to embrace more of a Joe Biden view of politics than Bernie Sanders at this point, especially those that vote in larger numbers, significant older African-American numbers. And so there was always this sense that I can't help but notice over the past few weeks as we've seen the campaign shift from Iowa and New Hampshire, where voters are very skeptical and looking to Joe Biden to prove something to them, and moved to Nevada, South Carolina, and some of these Super Tuesday states where there's a much more willingness to, I think, embrace Joe Biden, what he stands for, that the candidate's performance has also translated into better success for him. He is doing better. I tweeted this last night. I've been covering him since 2007. I don't think I've seen him having this much fun on the campaign trail. The happy warrior that he has often been he evokes from Hubert Humphrey, one of his political mentors, is back, and you saw that last night. He hasn't had a political moment like in the last 48 hours like he has just this weekend and yesterday, and he's clearly showing it, and I think that's translating.
What do they describe as a successful night tonight, Mike Memley?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head that part of what has led to a rallying around Joe Biden at this point is the fear of the quote-unquote establishment about Bernie Sanders. And they acknowledge that Bernie Sanders is going to have a good night in terms of delegates. Tonight is all about edging Michael Bloomberg finally out of the conversation. He has been on the receiving end, Bloomberg and his allies, of a lot of entreaties from the Democratic establishment, from people close to President Obama encouraging him to do what so many other candidates have done at this point and then get out of the way. The Biden campaign believes that there could be a Steyer-like dynamic where all this money, all this investment on the ground and on the air translates into nothing. So they also, though, I think, are sort of underplaying their chances in terms of delegates. They have a really interesting delegate strategy focused on the fact that the most powerful Democratic delegate districts, tonight are the ones that are heavily African American. So they think he can do better there than a lot of people are thinking, and that's where more delegates actually come from tonight, congressional district by congressional district, not statewide.
You know, and John Howland, I think Pete Buttigieg started pounding this theme even before Joe Biden did, but it's you know, if you sort of absorb part of the messages from the people that drop out and endorse you, this is a good one for Biden to have absorbed, and that's the benefit to Democratic candidates running for the Senate, running for the House, running statewide. This is the morning consult poll that Joe Biden woke up to, up 10 since Sunday. Right. It seems to say a lot that this race is so spastic still, that people are really, like, I mean, I don't remember such volatility. And it means, I think it, well, tell me what you think it means. I think it means that the electability question, as much as we've talked about it, is really hardwired. And that calculation changes after someone wins something.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's also that you had this giant crowded field. Democrats had a hard time figuring out for a year what to do. It didn't have its normal winnowing kind of function. And then we got to Iowa, New Hampshire, and it didn't do it then, which normally, you know, by the time you get out of the first two contests, you're often down to 3 candidates. You know, by the time you get to South Carolina, you're almost always down to 3. Right. Sometimes you're down to 2. And in this case, you had 6 out there in South Carolina. So the reality is that I think there's a lot of things that happened in South Carolina, but clearly the one, as the reality of Bernie Sanders set in for not just the establishment, to whatever that is or whatever that means, but for the giant chunk of the party that's not the progressive wing of the party, the 60% or so of the party that is more in line with not just Joe Biden's politics, but Pete Buttigieg's or Amy Klobuchar's or whatever you want to say, as they started to realize that Bernie Sanders was on a fast track coming out of Nevada to be the nominee. There was this last moment. It was South Carolina was the moment where Biden could save his candidacy if he won big enough and demonstrated that he had a hold over the most important constituency in the Democratic Party, the one that Bernie Sanders' lack of a hold on killed him in 2016. Right. That was the last outstanding question. Has Bernie made progress with the most important constituency in the party? Biden answered that. It answered it in both directions, that Biden still had that hold on the party, that loyalty, and that Bernie did not. I mean, when Bernie had the same African-American percentage of the vote this time as he did 4 years ago, it raised a large question. If Bernie Sanders hasn't made progress with African-Americans in South Carolina, has he made progress with them anywhere in the country? And the fact that Biden was the repository of all that, it suddenly became very clear. I was there, you know, in South Carolina. People looked up and said, okay, there's only one person who can stop Bernie Sanders now. He may or may not be able to do it, but he's the only one. Right. And that crystal kind of realization is why you've now seen all these dominoes fall so quickly in the following days.
Shaq, Brewster, we're going to be talking numbers all night long, so I want to put those aside for a second. I want to ask you about messages. I mean, Bernie Sanders also had the first week of any sort of real contrast to his record in a sustained way in a single state in the 7 days between Las Vegas and South Carolina, and it was around the issue. It started a little bit before Nevada. I'm sorry, not the state of Las Vegas, the state of Nevada.
It's a country unto itself.
I did brief Sarah Palin. Maybe she had a point. But the messaging sharpened up a little bit, maybe a couple days before Nevada, and then going into South Carolina, some real contrasts with Bernie Sanders. And I don't know that it really seeped into the national conversation, but at a state level, there were sharpened attacks around his record on guns and the reality of the cost of his health care plans. Is the Sanders campaign adjusting at all to defend itself, or are they sort of, you know, the no apology Bernie Sanders campaign still?
Well, if you listen to what Senator Sanders is saying, his message continues to be consistent. He stays on his same message on the stump. But I think one thing that you've really seen, especially after South Carolina and then going into these endorsements that Vice President Biden was able to accumulate, it allowed Senator Sanders to go back to more of a natural position. Remember, it was after Nevada where he had that big win where he was saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable. He expressed being weird for people to consider him a front runner. He is now able to rail against the establishment in a way that he hasn't hasn't been able to in a couple of weeks now. And that's how he's been responding to the endorsements. That's how his aides have been responding to those endorsements, saying these are politicians endorsing other politicians, that regular people don't really care about that. You're also hearing from Senator Sanders him trying to open the door to the supporters of these people who dropped out, these former candidates. He said he welcomes the supporters of Amy Klobuchar, of Mayor Pete Buttigieg. He wants them to join his coalition, saying there may be some differences, but at the end of the day, people believe in a government, in his words, that's about justice rather than greed. So you're seeing him try to embrace the supporters while pushing away what he calls the establishment, and that's a much more natural position for this senator than he's been able to be in for the past couple of weeks.
I get political spin. I've peddled it for a lot of my career. But the truth is, Joe Biden, as we said, he's not in this position because of the Democratic establishment. They would have left him for dead. I mean, he's in this position because African-American voters, as enthusiastically as they embraced Joe Biden, they rejected Bernie Sanders. I mean, is there any recognition of that?
Yeah, that's something I asked Senator Sanders yesterday before he left. We were in, we were in Salt Lake City. We've been moving around. In Salt Lake City, then Minneapolis, then came to Vermont. We were in Salt Lake City, and he allowed us to ask him some questions, and that was the question I put to him, where South Carolina was the first test of African-American support and the support of voters that he had, and he has frankly failed that test. And something that he pointed to, remember, he didn't go to Selma, and I asked him, does that help, not going to a place like Selma? Something he pointed to is that he said he believes among younger African-Americans, that's where he has the support. But we saw that happen in 2016. That's an advantage that he had in 2016, that generational gap that he has among younger voters. It's still not clear if they're understanding that he needs to do better across all voters. Jeff Weaver on MSNBC, while talking to Andrea Mitchell earlier today, was also asked how he does better about this, how he improves the turnout. And something that Jeff Weaver said was that it's about other candidates bringing out the turnout. He believes that Senator Sanders has the energy and excitement to bring people out, but it's still an open question about whether or not that can translate across a national spectrum. And that will be the test that we have here on Super Tuesday.
You shook your head, Corinne.
Yeah, no, I wanted to say, so African-American voters in South Carolina basically decided who was electable to them. And it wasn't just older African-Americans, it was also younger African-American voters in South Carolina. And we have to remember that. The last thing I wanted to say, talking to voters, I was in South Carolina and other early states, but when I was in South Carolina, they're playing pundits. They are looking at the voters. They're trying to figure out what is the biggest thing that they want. They want to beat Donald Trump. So they're looking at everyone and they're trying to make up their mind. It's not even hard, right? It's more of like, we want to know who can get to him, who can beat him in November. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing them being pundits out there.
Steve, when I watched the endorsement, the Unity rally last night, one thing was so clear, and we worked for a candidate in John McCain who knew Joe Biden as his friend in the Senate, and you saw him again as people's friends. I mean, sometimes these endorsements are so painful because they hate each other. You know, they're going in there. Nobody dislikes Joe Biden, and to see him win, to go and then endorse him after Pete Buttigieg, or Beto's obviously been out for a while, it doesn't seem unnatural, and he seems to be benefiting from being the guy that everyone liked, who has now finally won, who's assembled a coalition and as much enthusiasm among African-American voters as Barack Obama did in 2008. He seems to have everything lined up, and of course we'll see where it goes from here, but he seems to be in as good of a position as he's been.
It's lining up, and the symmetry from a message in a presidential election, which is always a choice, for Joe Biden, he makes it easy. Good man versus bad man, and a fundamental question for the country. And so I think that when you look at all the volatility that's been in the race, I think that there's been a migration of opinion by Democrats over the back half of 2019. I think if you went to the beginning of the summer and you talked to Democrats, it was inconceivable that Donald Trump could get elected. And I think by the time you hit mid-January 2020, oh my God, he's going to get another 4 years. And so I think you're seeing these numbers reflect that as Democratic voters take very seriously the existential importance of this election and putting somebody into the nomination that can defeat Donald Trump and bring together a coalition of people. And for Bernie Sanders, the message is so reminiscent of Trump's message and probably explains why 11% of Sanders voters crossed over and voted for Trump. It's a grievance message. It's an anger message. With regard to an establishment, certainly if there is one, Bernie Sanders is a part of it. He's a multimillionaire who owns 10 houses, he's a multimillionaire who owns 3 houses and serves in the United States Senate. That's the establishment. But trying to tear down the institutions has been the work of one party and the Trumpist movement. And to reciprocate it on the Democratic Party, I think there's a lot of angst going on right now, and I think that explains the volatility.
But here's the way in which Joe Biden is, in fact, what we've seen since South Carolina. You're right. It's because the African American vote that Joe Biden is able to has now emerged as the main moderate challenger to Bernie Sanders. But your point earlier, a powerful part of the argument is an establishment argument. It's that down-ticket Democrats in the House do not want to run with Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket. They don't. Even the ones on the left don't want to run with Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket. And that is the Democratic establishment. Those electeds who are moving behind Joe Biden. And you look at what has happened. Bernie Sanders is the front runner, and he's going to be the front runner tomorrow morning. He could be the prohibitive front runner tomorrow morning because of his money, his organization, the fact that he's so far ahead of Biden in states like California and Texas in particular. But the reality is, Bernie Sanders won 1/4 of the vote in Iowa, 1/4 of the vote in New Hampshire, 1/3 in Nevada, and 1/5 in South Carolina. And it tells you something a little messed up about the Democratic Party right now, that the potentially prohibitive frontrunner has won that small a portion of the Democratic electorates in the first 4 contests. That's an amazing fact, that he's not won more than 1/3, and that was in the smallest electorate in Nevada.
Well, let me just try to articulate the Sanders worldview. Sanders' event on Saturday in Boston in the snow with 10,000 supporters. I watched that speech. He is still, especially with Pete Buttigieg out of the race, the one with the deepest emotional connection to his base. I mean, if he hadn't failed so completely to turn out any part of that vote in South Carolina, if he could have proven his turnout model and pointed to African-American support in South Carolina, I think he would be in a stronger position. But I still see him emerging tomorrow morning with, as you said, potentially an insurmountable delegate lead.
Well, again, the rules of the convention are if there's a plurality winner and not a majority winner, it becomes a brokered convention. But I think when we look at this through the prism of the health of the country, I don't think necessarily a qualification for the presidency should be the intensity of the cult of personality. We have one cult of personality in this country, and one is bad enough. We don't need to have a second cult of personality, and I think you're seeing that play out to some degree.
Right, you're seeing Democratic voters thinking, maybe not. Maybe not. Shaq Brewster, Mike Memley, 2 of the best of the best. Thank you for starting us off and spending that first 22 minutes with us. I'm grateful. When we come back on this Super Tuesday, Mike Bloomberg under fire about what his path to the nomination looks like, but insisting he's in it till November. And prepping for a contested convention. Plus, Elizabeth Warren switches targets, abandoning her Bloomberg beatdown to go on the offense against Joe Biden, calling him an insider who poses a big risk to the party and the nation. Wow. And the scientific community tries to coexist with a president who believes in miracle cures for pandemics and doesn't seem to understand how a vaccine is used to protect citizens. We'll bring you the very latest on the administration's response to the coronavirus as new cases are identified. All those stories coming up.
Yes, and if Joe dropped out, they would take away. Joe's taking votes away from me, and I think that is true. I have no intention of dropping out. We're in it to win it, and I don't understand why you would not ask every other candidate to drop out. Here's your answer.
There's your answer. Mike Bloomberg will appear on primary ballots for the very first time today. In that clip, striking a defiant tone in the face of calls to end his campaign before it's actually really started. The backdrop for all that, his colossal wager, his spending on TV and radio advertising in today's contest, dwarfing the competition, $200 million, roughly the same as the payroll for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Again, that's just on Super Tuesday states. Joining our conversation in the nick of time, Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson. I mean, I guess it's good that money can't buy you love.
No, it can get you attention. It could get you on,
it can cost Joe Biden the delegates he needs.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how many delegates he costs Joe Biden.
Here's what I don't understand. 4 years ago, he didn't get in because he didn't want to do this precise thing to Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And he gave a convention speech along those lines. What do you think changed in 4 years?
For Bloomberg? Well, I take him at his word. He didn't think anybody could win. He didn't think anybody could beat Trump, and he has that bug that says, I could be president. I mean, and when people get that,
dream never dies.
It never dies, right? So he still had that, and look, this is couch cushion change for him, what he's spending, and he had it to spend.
Buy a baseball team. I mean, my God.
He could buy a baseball league easily and not miss the money. But but it'll be very interesting, because if he really underperforms today, and I think there's a chance that he does, this guy, he is a data wonk. Right? I mean, the data wonkiness is what made him his fortune. So he's got to look at it and say, where am I going here?
Steve, I think his debate performances read even more profoundly devastating to his viability than pundits saw. He stood there and looked somehow above the process. And I think the money combined with the look of, I doubt he was disinterested. I bet it was some combination of being unprepared and unaccustomed to that format. But I think the fact that money got him his standing in the polls, and then the debate performances just channeled disinterest and a lack of preparedness, really sealed his fate.
Well, I think that we need to watch and see tonight how the returns come in, that there'll be a lot of volatility in the race. Our old state of California, early voting, about a third of the vote in, but California always breaks late. So that same day voting, we're going to see who has momentum in this race all across the side. But I think one of the important things for Democrats to understand is the incredible fundraising advantage that Donald Trump has over the Democratic Party, the Democratic candidates. And in order to win a general election against Donald Trump, the Democratic candidates need Mike Bloomberg to do what Mike Bloomberg said. When you saw the debacle in Iowa, the collapse of the technology platforms, the Trump technology platforms are not going to collapse between today and Election Day. You can't say that about the Democrats. And certainly you look at the sophistication of the targeting and all of the things that Bloomberg is doing. And I just, at a personal level, this idea that there are some of these candidates, by announcing 3 years early, that they have legitimacy in the race, and people who get into the race later, I just really disagree with it. When you look at his argument that he made today, which is that nobody's going to accrue the necessary delegates, we have a process, we have rules, and at a convention, we should pick the strongest candidate to go up against Trump. What he's saying, what his belief, his conviction is that I'm the guy who can beat Donald Trump for any one of a number of reasons. And I think that when you look at Joe Biden, I do think it's fair to say, though he had a great victory, that his performance has been uneven over the course of the campaign at such a level that if you're looking at the Trump versus Biden contest, you have reason to be wary.
Well, I think if you're, again, if that's your argument, Biden's performance was uneven. No one's performance was more evenly subpar than Bloomberg.
Yeah. And his theory of the case. So the air has been taken out of the balloon. And what I mean by that is his performance, the two debates performance, were subpar or awful, however you want to look at it. But also, Joe Biden is doing better. One of the reasons he got in, the theory of the case.
That was Mike Bloomberg calling Steve.
What are you talking about?
That was Mike Bloomberg. Mike Bloomberg's
I'm going to break your leg. No, but Joe Biden is now doing better, right? We have to see if this is not just a one-off, as I said earlier. But look, Bloomberg is an X factor. There are two X factors here. It's Bloomberg and Warren.
I agree.
What happens tonight? Do they reach that 15% threshold? Does it hurt Biden? Does it hurt Bernie? Same vice versa for Warren, Elizabeth Warren, and we're going to find out tonight.
We're going to talk about that next. What do you think about the Bloomberg candidacy?
I think that Mike Bloomberg got in the race having decided, as he did in 2008, 2012, 2016, he decided in 2020 that there was no path for him to win. He watched for a year, At the moment that he decided to get in, it was when Biden was at his kind of nadir and Warren was on the rise. They saw a very narrow opening, which was not that they ever thought that he could get in late and win the nomination outright, but that they could go to the convention in Milwaukee and maybe win a contested scenario. That seemed to be going okay when the race was chaotic and fluid and he was not being seen by any actual voters. He was only an image on the advertising that was flooding the country.
And their ads are great.
Much of it suggesting erroneously, falsely, and misleadingly that Barack Obama was somehow endorsing Mike Bloomberg, which, like a lot of people in the country, having seen that ad over and over again, came to the conclusion when, in fact, neither of them likes the other one at all. You then had the debate. And I think the debate, you're right, the debate was not only catastrophically bad and allowed voters to imagine what it would be like to see him against Donald Trump. It's like, voters were mostly saying, here's Mike Bloomberg, he's got all this money, maybe he can take on Trump.
Right.
Oh my God, that's Mike Bloomberg, he can't take on Trump. And then suddenly it looked more like he was just trying to buy the election, because if the guy's that bad, it looks more like you're just trying to like pull one over on the voters by kind of hiding. And so he goes out of the debate stage and does poorly. Right now, what's in Mike Bloomberg's mind, most of the people around him are saying to him, as of Saturday, they're saying to him, if you are serious, and this is a fact, they're saying to him, if you're serious about beating Bernie Sanders, you should drop out of the race today, meaning like Sunday. And Mike Bloomberg's attitude is, like you can imagine a lot of rich men, his response is, you guys, I spent $500 million on this race. You're telling me to get out of the race before a single person in a single state where my name is on the ballot has had a chance to vote. Screw you, has been his attitude. So he is going to compete today, and we're going to see how he does. There is a lot of early vote. Votes were cast in the period before that debate when he was still looking good on the back of the ads. There could be a lot of Mike Bloomberg vote out there in those early votes. We're going to see how he does. I think tomorrow morning, Mike Bloomberg and the people around him are going to reassess. And if he has a really great day today, he's not getting out. If he has a really, really bad day today, I think there's a chance that he will come back to his senses and say, hey, wait a minute, we got to stop Bernie Sanders. And because that's the way to beat Donald Trump. They all believe that if Sanders is the nominee, he will lose to Trump. And I think Bloomberg could, if he has a bad enough day today, he could be out of the race before the weekend. All
right, when we come back, Elizabeth Warren. She's still on the offense against all of her opponents, but she's got a new target. It's Joe Biden. That story's next.
No matter how many Washington insiders tell you to support him, nominating fellow Washington insider will not meet this moment. And now we find ourselves barreling toward another primary along the same lanes as 2016. One for an insider, one for an outsider. Democratic voters should have more choice than that. America should have more choice than that. That's why I'm running for president.
Tables back. Green, which I got lost. Which one's the insider? The one who's a current senator or the one who's a retired vice president? Who's she attacking?
And by the way, she's a sitting senator.
Right.
So it's,
and the ultimate Washington insider. I mean, I think she has her priorities straight. They're for people who suffer, people who fall through the cracks. But so Biden's the insider in that attack, not Sanders?
I think that's a Biden attack. It seemed like to me. Look, Warren is going to have a tough night. I mean, there's a couple things she has to do. First of all, she has to win her state. She cannot lose her state. You cannot lose your state and saying you're going to be the next president of the United States. So that's number one. And number two, she also has to...
So you think if she loses Massachusetts, she has to quit the race tomorrow?
I think she has to rethink her place in this race. It's just not... I don't think
it's a humiliation.
It's not plausible. You can't move forward and lose your own state.
That was why Jeb Bush got out after losing South Carolina before Florida.
There's reasonable chances why Amy Klobuchar got out of this race when she did too.
Well, that's why Kamala Harris got out.
Yeah, exactly. To get her name off of the ballot in California,
So what's she up to? So what's she up to?
Warren? Well, you know, I don't know. If I were Warren, one of the things I'd be thinking about is, okay, if I stay in, what impact am I having on this race? Am I hurting Bernie Sanders by siphoning off progressive strength? Am I somehow hurting Joe Biden? And if I'm not going to win, which one do I want to hurt? You know, I mean, that could play into her calculation. But, campaigns usually end when they kind of run out of money or hope or both. And I think if she loses Massachusetts, I think she'll be out of realistic hope. She still has some money, but that'll run out too.
I guess I wonder, there was a lot of, I think, consternation that this field went from being the most diverse in terms of gender and ethnicity to not
really old white guys.
And I wonder how much of that is on her mind. What do you think?
I think so. I think, look, I think Elizabeth Warren has been known to be a fighter. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. What is it? Why did she not take off? She had a great campaign. She has a wonderful message that permeates with a lot of people. A lot of it is the consolidation by Bernie Sanders of the progressive kind of sector there. And, you know, just to step back just a little bit more, in 2015, she was urged by Move On. We did a run, warrant, run. She decided not to run. Bernie Sanders stepped into that space. And from then on, he just took it. And so that's one of the things. And also, she had that unity message that didn't work because people wanted her to fight. And now she's fighting, but it might be too late.
All right, after the break, the post-truth president struggles to process the truth about vaccines. We'll bring you the latest on the White House's efforts to calm a worried public about the coronavirus next.
That entire process will take at least a year and a half. So when we hear talk about a vaccine's going to be ready in a couple of months, it won't be ready for being deployed. It's going to take a while.
We're moving aggressively to accelerate the process of developing a vaccine. A lot of good things are happening, and they're happening very fast. I said, do me a favor, speed it up, and they will.
Comments made literally 1 hour apart this morning. As the number of cases of coronavirus continues to grow, it's now confirmed in 15 states, and the death toll has risen to 9. The president yet again pushing for a vaccine in a time frame that his own infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, warns is not possible. But Fauci understands the precarious line he now walks between Trump and truth, telling Politico, quote, "You should never destroy your own credibility, and you don't want to go to war with the president. But you got to walk the fine balance of making sure you continue to tell the truth." Joining our conversation, Washington Post White House reporter Ashley Parker. Ashley, you and your colleagues have had some really remarkable reporting about what this period has been like for the president. The piece, I think it popped Saturday night when we were all on the air covering South Carolina about just the president's almost singular and maniacal focus on the markets as a tool for strengthening his own reelection seems to have sort of colored all of his interactions with scientists and everyone else in the government. Has any of that changed?
He's still focused on the markets. He's following those gyrations. He's also, this is a president, and this is the challenge for a lot of these agencies and public health officials who are actually experts in this field, is that this is a president who is accustomed to following and obsessing over not just 24-hour news cycles, but hourly news cycles and minute-by-minute news cycles. And one of the things they're sort of internally trying to navigate, and that Fauci interview got at it a bit, is the ability to explain to the president, look, you may have to take a bad news cycle. You may have to take a hit that doesn't sound great on TV when someone comes out and says, look, there is community spread, or look, we're taking mitigation steps, and that may mean closing down schools in a certain county, and that sounds scary, and it is a bad news cycle. But it's a bad news cycle for a day to help you win the broader war, which is actually eradicating this fast-moving virus. And that's the ultimate good news cycle. But there's a lot of mini bad news cycles in that. And that's what they're trying to explain to the president. And it's a question they're kind of trying to figure out. How far can they go in pushing this president to accept bad news, and news, as you said at the beginning, that may make the markets tumble momentarily?
Ashley, you asked the question on every parent's mind when you asked the vice president yesterday if he would take his kids, his family, to Disneyland. Tell us about that.
So he didn't entirely answer, but the reason I asked that was because that's exactly what we are hearing. That's what I'm hearing from my friends and family, and that's what readers are writing in to the Washington Post. And what they want to know are the things, what everyone wants to know, how it affects their day-to-day life. Spring break is coming up. Should they cancel trips that they've already booked? Should they refrain from booking trips? How safe is it to travel in the United States? And Disney World is kind of that classic example. And so we wanted to know, would the vice president feel comfortable taking his wife, his 3 grown children, you know, their husbands and wives and partners, partners to Disneyland and Disney World. And again, he kind of, I don't want to say he dodged the question. He didn't quite give a clear answer, but he did say, look, I travel all over the country, and as of now, there are no explicit warnings not to travel domestically.
Ashley, there's some great reporting from your colleagues about what the president didn't say when he did that press conference. The case in, I think, California had just been reported to him, and I believe in news organizations. He didn't reveal it. Is transparency their goal, or is it something else?
I mean, that was so striking. I believe that was actually the lead of our Sunday story. They say transparency is one of their goals, and transparency in general is one of the key things you need to communicate to the public to get them to trust you when dealing with a global health crisis. And some people are committed to transparency, but you have a president, again, who does not like to be the bearer of bad news, who does not like to see the markets fall. And so while other people in his administration and on this team very well may legitimately be committed to transparency, you are not always seeing that from the top, and that creates this muddled messaging, this mixed messaging, and the very thing you don't want in the middle of a pandemic when the public is turning on the TV and saying, well, wait a second, the president said one thing, the CDC director said another. Who can I trust? What should I do?
It's an unbelievable thing to be covering, I'm sure. Ashley Parker, thank you for spending some time with us.
Thank you.
The table weighs in on this right after a quick break. We're back. Eugene, there's perhaps nothing more daunting than the thought of people. You know, we live in this. We consume so much political information. We can sift through reliable and unreliable. If you're out there just hungry for the facts and you've got a president contradicting Anthony Fauci on vaccines, I imagine you're pretty frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, you know, pro tip, when the president says one thing and Fauci says another, believe Fauci, right? He's one of the.
But we know that. He's you know.
Believe him. And second, I'm just hoping we get some more clarity as we get some actual testing in this country. I mean, that's really been the gap, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I do talk to them, and they say that, you know, you don't find it unless you look for it, right? I mean, we need to know better the extent of infection, and that might actually make people feel better about it. You know, it might be that a huge number of people are infected by the...
And they might feel better about that, but I think here's more to worry about. The New York Times reports that Defense Secretary Mark Esper...
Here's more to worry about here.
First I find
the Gene's not an epidemiologist. Now you got more things to worry about.
So sorry for trying to make people feel better, but
the American military commanders overseas have been urged not to make any decisions related to coronavirus that might surprise the White House or run afoul of President Trump's messaging. What?
Crazy. Listen, it really is. If you think about,
Peak 2020, folks.
If you think about political oratory and really the greatest crisis management speech of all time, it's Winston Churchill talking to the British people after the fall of British forces at Dunkirk. He doesn't start out by saying we beat the Germans or it's not a problem. It starts with a reckoning of reality, communicating calmly, precisely, with facts, and having a plan. That's the job of government. And so we're sitting here today talking about Donald Trump, and this is the deep state that he's mistrustful for. And when we look at Bernie Sanders, we understand that in Democratese, the establishment is deep state. Same stuff.
It's unbelievable. All right. On that note, we will be here all night along with you. A quick break for us. Don't go anywhere, though. We'll be right back.
Well, if it's Tuesday, it's a special Super Tuesday edition of Meet the Press Daily. We're starting March Madness now. So good evening. I'm Chuck Todd, coming to you live from NBC election headquarters right here in New York City, where we are gearing up for quite a night and early morning in what has already been a roller coaster of a Democratic primary contest. And they don't call it Super Tuesday for nothing. 14 states, the two biggest prizes, California and Texas, more than 1,300 delegates. That's roughly a third of all delegates are at stake tonight alone. And it's a significantly more competitive contest for the frontrunner Bernie Sanders than anybody thought possible just a few days ago. And then there's Joe Biden, who's rapidly consolidating support from the moderate wing of the party following his victory in South Carolina. Endorsements last night from basically the former moderate field: Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Beto O'Rourke. The first polls close in less than 2 hours, but we are just moments away from the first look at the NBC News Super Tuesday exit polls, which will give us an early look at the mood and makeup of the electorate in key contests tonight. The biggest thing I'm curious about: how many people waited to the very last minute to make their decision? Frontrunner Bernie Sanders is hoping that electorate gives him a commanding delegate lead after tonight. It would mean running up the score in California. 415 delegates alone are up for grabs in that state. Millions have already voted early. What does that mean? Could take weeks, by the way, to count all the California votes, which will inject yet another dose of uncertainty into this race. Sanders is also hoping for a win in Texas, where our recent NBC News Marist poll had him leading by double digits, but also had Bloomberg up big. All of that was before South Carolina. Biden, however, is hoping to limit the damage in those two states, maybe even pull a surprise in Texas, while building on that South Carolina win this weekend, where he hopes to have big victories in the other southern states up for grabs tonight. Think Alabama, Virginia, Tennessee. But even a great night for Biden still likely means that Sanders would be ahead in delegates. But momentum may matter, and keep an eye on the symbolic importance of whether Biden and Bloomberg's combined support outpaces Sanders tonight, which brings us to a couple of other X factors: Bloomberg's billions and the Warren wildcard. Bloomberg has dropped nearly $200 million on the Super Tuesday airwaves alone. It's an astronomical sum that may or may not get him above a simple 15% threshold to earn delegates. And then there's Elizabeth Warren, who's hoping to revitalize her campaign tonight. She needs to avoid losing to Sanders in her home state of Massachusetts, where Sanders rallied more than 10,000 people this weekend. At this hour, I'll be talking with advisors and surrogates from the top campaigns, our reporters with the latest news inside the campaigns. Plus, you know what we're going to be doing any second now, bringing you the first hints of the exit poll with our man Kornacki. But let's begin with the latest news from the campaigns. Casey Hunt is with the Sanders campaign in Burlington, Vermont. Mike Memoli is following the Biden camp in Los Angeles. Gabe Gutierrez is with Bloomberg in Florida. Ali Vitale is following the Warren campaign in Detroit. Mike Memoli, we will start with you in Los Angeles. It's interesting you're there. Is the Biden campaign, is there a presence of the Biden campaign in Southern California?
Well, the former vice president will be here to have what he hopes is a celebratory night in California tonight. But I think there's more emphasis on where we were yesterday, which was Texas. That's emerged in the last few days as sort of a centerpiece of their Super Tuesday strategy. And Chuck, I think on this Super Tuesday, back to the conversation you and I had on the night of the Iowa caucuses, when I was telling you how they were very eagerly downplaying and lowering expectations, either for effect or because they knew what was about to happen. I think the difference with Super Tuesday is I think they welcome the lower expectations, the conventional wisdom that Bernie Sanders will end up tomorrow with a pretty large delegate haul, because they do feel like there are indications that things have moved in their direction. I think the biggest thing to look for and what they're hoping to see a repeat from South Carolina is the Tom Steyer effect with Michael Bloomberg. If that happens, then that pushes Joe Biden above the delegate threshold he needs in a lot of places, and especially what they're really focused on are congressional districts. You know this, Chuck. I know that more delegates are awarded on the basis of congressional district than on statewide results. And that's why the limited resources that the Biden campaign have been poured so heavily into the districts that look like South Carolina. They think they can pick off an extra one here and there, and that'll make a difference down the road.
Well, Barack Obama did a lot of that, if I remember, in California in 2008, where Hillary Clinton won it, but he cherry-picked enough delegates to keep her advantages there to a minimum. We'll see how well that strategy works there. Mike Memoli, thanks. Let's go to Bernie Sanders in Burlington, Vermont, with Casey Hunt. And Casey, this has to be quite the whiplash for the Sanders campaign, watching the entire Democratic Party wing, I guess, establishment wing, whatever you want to call it, coalesce in a way that I don't think any of us thought was possible a week ago.
Right, Chuck, certainly in the last month, what we have learned about this race, but I think it's important. The campaign has always been fundamentally assuming that this was how this race started organizing. All right, we're having with the expectation.
Casey, we're going to let you, you may hear this, we're going to let you go. Your video's taking a bunch of hits. We're going to figure that out. Let me go over to Gabe Gutierrez, who's been with Bloomberg today in Florida, which does not vote today. Florida votes in 2 weeks. So how is Michael Bloomberg handling all these questions of when are you getting out or are you hurting Joe Biden?
Well, Chuck, Bloomberg is definitely hearing a growing chorus to get out of the race, but he is remaining defiant. Several times today he was asked whether he would drop out of the race and coalesce behind Joe Biden, and he repeatedly said that he was in it to win it, and then he is sticking around. We're here with him in Florida, which, as you mentioned, doesn't vote today. Primary here is actually in 2 weeks, but Bloomberg is ramping up his campaign here. He has more than 160 paid staffers here. He has 16 campaign offices. He spent the day crisscrossing the state. And that's because he is arguing that he is still better positioned to win this state, especially after those comments a few days ago from Bernie Sanders about Fidel Castro. Bloomberg spent the day reaching out to Cuban-American voters in Miami. I caught up with him there, and again, he was asked about the possibility of him dropping out of the race. Here's how he responded.
Joe's taking votes away from me, and I think that is true. And
But you're also taking votes away from Joe Biden.
Well, it goes in both directions. I have no intention of dropping out. We're in it to win it, and I don't understand why you would not ask every other candidate to drop out.
Do you want a contested convention?
Well, I don't think that I can win any other ways. But contested convention is a democratic process.
And that last point is key, Chuck. Other contested convention, that is increasingly drawing Democrats to criticize him for potentially splitting up the party. But again, Chuck, as you've been saying, he has spent $500 million in this campaign. He apparently has decided that, before the first vote is cast in the states that he's competing in, he wants to see how this plays out. And so he has a lot riding on the results tonight, Chuck.
And he sounded a bit defensive there almost about this, which is, that's interesting there.
I asked him when I was walking in Miami, and he seemed upset, annoyed even, that he was getting calls from that. His campaign also pushing back on a report this afternoon in Vanity Fair that said that some of his advisors have been urging him to get out of the race. His campaign spokesperson now says there is zero truth to that. And again, Bloomberg seems defiant at this point, even though many Democrats are urging him to at least consider coalescing behind Biden.
Well, Gabe, I think if you and I spent $600 million too, we might be stubborn about this ourselves. Anyway, Gabe Gutierrez, thanks very much. Let me check in with Ali Vitale. She's in Detroit. Michigan is a state that votes a week from today. Talk about Elizabeth Warren trying to send a message. She's not going anywhere tonight. At least that's what she'd like to say. What they are acknowledging, they have no traditional path to the nomination that doesn't take a convention to fix things. So what is their goal tonight? What's a good night for them then?
Yeah, Chuck, you're exactly right. Her campaign's been calling Milwaukee the final play. And I feel like so many journalists like me got into this business because we're not good at math or data. But tonight, those are the two words that the Warren campaign is going to be all about. Hitting those 15% viability thresholds, trying to get as many delegates as possible, but also testing the theory that they've been talking about. When I ask them what it means for all these other candidates getting out of the race, they remind me of something that, frankly, I've seen out here on the campaign trail time and time again, the fact that voters don't vote based on lanes. And so when you see someone like Amy Klobuchar or Pete Buttigieg getting out of the race, the assumption should not be that they automatically go to Joe Biden, because I've met those voters, and Elizabeth Warren is certainly in the mix. The campaign regularly pointing us to polling that shows her as a consistent second choice. But Chuck, I'll tell you, this morning I talked to her in Massachusetts. She was short with me when I asked if she was going to win her home state, because it's twofold there. You get the crowds when you're walking out to vote, which is what she had this morning, but then you also have to show up and actually win there.
Ali Vitale with Warren, again, in Michigan, which is a primary state 1 week from today. Now, I think we've got our technical issues fixed with Casey Hunt in Burlington. Casey, I hope so. Take it away.
So, Chuck, basically, the Sanders campaign has planned for this all the way along. He has been expecting fully that the Democratic establishment was going to be relatively monolithic and also against him. That doesn't mean he's not been trying privately to make some inroads there, but I think this expectation has existed all the way along, and they have been organizing in such a way to try and figure out how to overcome it. And that means, of course, relying on big states like Texas and California. I think the big challenge for them tonight is going to be on that momentum question, both yes, because Joe Biden is clearly benefiting from it, but also because the way the night's going to play out, and you know this better than anybody, means that they may not get a narrative of momentum on their side because of how late California comes in, and we may not know
the time zone
those results. So that's a pretty tricky, exactly, and the counting. So it's a pretty tricky situation for them. Now, that said, you know, he's been hitting Joe Biden directly for weeks. That's a shift from what he did in 2016. He really had held his fire against Hillary Clinton. Didn't do that this time, hitting Joe Biden on his judgment on the Iraq War, trade deals. So I think the frame for this race is one that Bernie Sanders is very comfortable with, Chuck.
I think you're right there, and he does seem to be solidifying how he wants to run against Joe Biden. We're going to hear a lot tonight. Thank you, Casey. Without a moment to spare, let's get our first look at tonight's exit polls from Steve Kornacki at the big board. So, Steve, I know we got a ton to go through, and so this is all state-based data, but take it away. I know we're hopefully going to focus a little bit on decision time and ideology. What did we learn?
Got a couple things here. Yeah, first of all, to explain what you're seeing here, these are at first wave. We always say that first wave. There'll be more data that comes in. We don't have exit polls covering every Super Tuesday state. Utah and Arkansas are not part of the exit poll. Keep that in mind. But what you're going to look at here is sort of the composite first wave exit poll data for all of the other states up today, kind of merged together to give you a sense overall of what this electorate is looking like. So first of all, you can take a look at age here. It's a little bit more than a third is under 45, a little bit more, nearly 2/3, I should say, is 45 plus. And remember, age has been such a huge dividing line in this primary campaign in terms of which voters are supporting which candidates. We can also show you on race here. This is a little bit more than 60% white today, 18% Hispanic. Remember, California going today, Texas going today, real big tests of the Hispanic electorate, 14% African American. Here's an interesting question. We saw this one in South Carolina last week, and I thought it was interesting there, and it's in this exit poll too. Should the next president's policies be more of a return to Barack Obama's policies, more liberal, more conservative? Now, take a look here. The number is 44% return to Obama's policy. I'll give you a couple other numbers. We've asked this question a few times during the primary season. Last week in South Carolina, this number checked in at 53%. In New Hampshire, a couple weeks earlier, this number checked in at 44%. So that's the range. We're about level with that. But taking a look at some of these individual states in this exit poll.
Show me California.
Big variation. Well, how about this one? I'll show you North Carolina. The number in North Carolina is 56. It is higher than the number we saw in South Carolina.
Yeah, I wonder how that helps.
And I'll give you the other range, the other end of this range. If you take a look, Massachusetts, big state up tonight, that number clocking in at 40. So there's some significant variance there. But you see that question there. South Carolina was 53. You're looking at 56 in North Carolina. Again, first wave exit poll data, Chuck. So we've got more here to come in, obviously. A lot more to come in.
A ton more. Kornacki, this is going to be a nice, interesting, fun night. I call it not the Super Bowl. This is our start of March Madness, I think. So anyway, thanks very much. The exit poll data will keep coming in. We're going to check back in when we get more of it, including time of decision-making, things like that. And we've got much more to come. It's the biggest day of the Democratic primary calendar, period. Will anyone dominate the delegate math tonight? Or is everybody going to have to get out their calculators? That's ahead.
With Buttigieg and Klobuchar dropping out, why not coalesce around Biden?
I just answered your question. Why don't they coalesce around me? What are you talking about?
So you spent 500.
I think that I can beat Donald Trump better than anybody else. I think I can run the country better than anybody else.
Welcome back to a special Super Tuesday edition of Meet the Press Daily. That was Mike Bloomberg earlier today with our own Gabe Gutierrez. And as you can see, he's very defensive about these questions, more so than most candidates. As we mentioned earlier, Bloomberg also acknowledged today that the only way he can win the Democratic nomination is at a contested convention this summer. Joining me now is NBC News senior Washington correspondent Andrea Mitchell, David Plouffe, former Obama campaign manager, also an MSNBC and NBC News contributor, and Maria Teresa Kumar, president of Voto Latino and also an NBC News and MSNBC contributor. Welcome all. Andrea, first of all, this Joe Biden revival. I mean, before we get into the nitty-gritty here, McCain 08, this seems as big and maybe even more impressive than what McCain pulled off in 08.
I mean, the big question was what kind of bounce out of South Carolina? Then this extraordinary 24 hours with all of these people dropping out, endorsing him. Was it real? Could he capitalize on it? The fact is he has no organization and no money. So what can he make of this on this huge day? And that's the question we're going to see tonight. Can he make something of it and build on the momentum from these endorsements? Will the moderate group split up? And what does it mean for Mike Bloomberg?
But what is the party saying, David and Maria Teresa, that, I mean, they're jumping into a boat that a week ago looked like it was going to sink.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, so it is a reminder again that momentum is more important than anything in politics. He is doing all of this on the wings of momentum. Secondly, let's remember, it's always easier for a politician to get back support they once had. So Biden was the national frontrunner. Looked rickety, didn't do well in the first states, didn't do well in debates. He has one great night, people come back. In part because nobody else answered the mail. Pete did well, but didn't grow his base. Warren was stuck in the teens. Bloomberg looked promising for people, but then laid an egg on the debate stage. So he was the last guy standing. And the African-American vote is obviously going to power him. I think we'll see that tonight. But as you look at the rest of the calendar in March, Chuck, as you know, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida should be a good Biden state. He's got to survive tonight, and if he does, he's got to like the terrain coming after this.
Maria Teresa, I'm fascinated, because Texas is my favorite state to watch tonight, because it's these two coalitions.
I've been telling you, Chuck.
You have been. No. You have been, and you deserve 1,000 people. This is the clash of what looks to me like two equal-sized coalitions, young voters, some working class and Latinos with Sanders, African-American older voters, I guess call them suburban, the college-educated crowd with Biden. And it feels like Texas is the perfect test, because that splits that party, right? It's almost like they're meeting in Dallas.
It's the perfect storm, and we are underestimating Warren's stronghold. She, all of a sudden, has brought the only person that could actually grow that electoral base that Biden's going to need, and the one that Bernie actually desperately wants her to drop out, so he can coalesce around that. Yeah. So in Texas, you see a lot of suburban women who really champion her, regardless of race or economic status. And so it'll be interesting how she does tonight, because that all of a sudden gives her a different leverage than we've seen.
One of my producers brought this up, Andrea, about this Warren supporter, basically these Warren supporters. They may ideologically be more comfortable with Bernie, but they're still angry personally at Bernie and how they feel as if Hillary was treated. And that this is something that is a bit of a wild card. You can't just assume, while you can assume most of Bloomberg goes to Biden, you can't assume most of Warren goes to Bernie.
They're also angry at Bernie for the way he's been treating Warren. When you look at it, what the fissure that opened up between them, I still say that Bernie has the most extraordinary fundraising, online fundraising organization in American history. There's nothing that parallels it. He can keep going and going and going.
We used to say that about Obama in 2008, and it's not even close anymore.
Well,
with the strength that Biden might be seeing tonight, there is only one way that he can really go head-to-head, toe-to-toe with Bernie for the distance, and that is if Bloomberg does not do well, and if he throws his money to Biden, that gives Biden the organization, the staffing, and the money.
By the way, Bloomberg is...
But this is what's interesting. What I'm hearing, too, is that there is a strong affinity for Bernie from Steyer. And it will be interesting if he decides to, because he's already been funding a lot of the Democratic
becomes the billion.
base.
So what, the two billionaires split? Like they each get a billionaire?
Yeah. But Steyer doesn't have... Steyer can't translate his money into any kind of...
But he has an infrastructure through Next Gen and these young voters that actually help him and help...
Correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel.
I didn't see it in South Carolina.
Most of his Next Gen, a lot of those folks ended up going to work for Bernie, right? Like he trained a lot of them in 2018.
And you see them, and when you look at the map, Nevada, that was one of the infrastructures that Steyer didn't do well, but that was one of the infrastructures that Bernie was able to tap into. So it's going to be he's close to him. It will be interesting if anything, just out of spite to say, well, I don't want.
Another really interesting division is African Americans of different ages now with Joe Biden and his Latino vote. With Sanders, you've got the two minority.
The problem for Bernie, the one question I have is Bernie's coalition is filled with people that haven't traditionally been reliable voters, while Biden's coalition is filled with folks that are considered more reliable primary voters. Is that fair to say, David?
I think so, but I think Sanders' organization and the affinity they have for him and the money means that they're going to maximize that. But again, I think you have to look at, so Biden does need to raise more money. He's got to perform better, to your rickety boat question, including a really important debate coming up soon. But, you have to look at these states. If it gets down roughly to a two-person race, there is more favorable territory for Biden left than Bernie. And that's why if you're Sanders, you've got to maximize your delegate yield tonight.
Hey,
And you want Warren on your team.
Take us inside, David, take us inside Michael Bloomberg's head right there. That looks like a candidate who's just, there's part of me, I think, that gets it. He knows it isn't going to work, but he's PO'd, he has to answer for it.
Well, sure. So first of all, 4 days ago, it looked like he was going to be the savior, number one. That's hard to reconcile. Secondly, you know, Bloomberg has rarely failed in life. So now he's spent a historic amount of money, and he may not even be viable in some states. Where, again, a week or two ago, it looked like he could be potentially the Democratic.
He was going to win primaries.
Well,
I think Arkansas and Tennessee in particular, and to me, those are the two places to
He can be the white knight for Joe Biden and for the Democratic Party and for the unity message of bringing them all together by just, you know, passing out the cash and the organization.
Is there a penalty for taking that money, Maria Teresa?
It's hard. I would have thought that he would have basically talked about how he's actually funded most of the progressive issues that people care about, whether it's March for Our Lives, Planned Parenthood. You go down the list, and he hasn't taken that to a cause. But climate. I mean, Planned Parenthood. Basically every single major thing that you care about. And it'll be interesting to see how folks actually react to that, because they have to deflect that it's not about buying an election, but it's about growing the infrastructure.
Let me ask you this: as your organization, do you feel like would you get heat for taking Bloomberg money now?
So I think that, I mean, that's the challenge.
Right.
We don't know, right? But I do think that what he said when he came in running for president, he was very clear. He's like, even if I don't win, I'm going to continue building.
Well, he's got to fulfill that promise, doesn't he?
And that's what he's going to have to do.
Well, I will say this: the money's helpful, and he does have talent. The other thing is, now Bloomberg's been in a position where they fund every idea, good or bad.
It's true.
But they're very innovative. I think they're doing some really interesting digital work. And so if Biden ends up benefiting from that, particularly when you're staring across the map at Trump, who, you know, they are digital marketing first. So whoever's our nominee is going to benefit, I think, from the Bloomberg.
I will say this: I don't hate the idea that they're testing the limits of those ridiculous social media policies on political advertising. Good for them for breaking it. Sorry. I am enjoying watching that. Andrea, David, Maria Teresa, stick around. Up ahead, it's a high-stakes night for both Sanders and Biden. How would they define victory tonight? We've got folks from both camps. They're joining me next.
We are putting together a multi-generational, multi-racial movement of people who are standing up for justice. And to beat Donald Trump, we are going to need to have the largest voter turnout in the history of this country. We need energy. We need excitement. I think our campaign is that campaign.
Welcome back. Bernie Sanders sounding pretty confident this morning as he cast his ballot in his home state of Vermont, which is a Super Tuesday state. Joining me from their headquarters in Burlington, Faz Shakur. He's the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders. Faz, first of all, happy Super Tuesday, man. We're here.
Thank you, Chuck. Big night.
I think you guys feel as if you're going to have a pretty good night. The question is it a great night or is it a pretty good night? So, and I mean that. I'm not trying to be facetious here. What do you think of 600 as sort of your magic number tonight? North of 600 and you guys feel great. Under 600 and it's a dogfight on delegates.
We walk into tonight with the delegate lead. We want to walk out of it with a bigger delegate lead. And I will feel good about many scenarios of having a large delegate lead. You have David Plouffe on the program, and he knows when Obama and Hillary were fighting, they were fighting over a delegate map. And I think increasingly, as we get into this contest with Joe Biden, we're going to be fighting to retain as many delegates. And guess what? The person who has the most delegate wins this game. So we are going to try to battle it out for as many delegates as we can get.
I know you've come to ignore it. Do you think that President Trump's constant attempts to troll the Democratic primary with what appears to be helpful messaging to you, but in a way that creates division in the party, does that hurt your candidacy or does it help it?
I don't see it as helpful messaging to us. I see him as trolling the Democratic Party, saying, oh, they're going to try to steal it away from Bernie Sanders. You think he gives a damn about Bernie Sanders? No, all he's doing is trying to divide Democratic voters against one another. And obviously, as we saw in the last election, he's trying to pry away some of those voters to his own side. But he's a con man. He's a con artist. This is what he does. He's an entertainment president. Instead of focusing on the coronavirus, he's here trolling the Democratic Party as much as often as he can. But if we get distracted by that, one of the arguments, by the way, of why Bernie Sanders is the best candidate to take him on is he doesn't get distracted. You know, he stays pretty disciplined. I don't think he gets enough credit for being as disciplined a candidate as he is.
Well, we try to give him credit for that. I think that is a part of his great strength is his discipline. Let me ask you, of watching the last 48 hours, on one hand, it plays into what Bernie Sanders says all the time. The establishment is getting nervous. The establishment is getting scared. But when you see that kind of force come in for Joe Biden, as much as it plays into your messaging, okay, but it certainly makes your life more difficult. This is going to be a slog.
Well, the choice before Democratic primary voters was always whether you want to take on the injustice of the current system, whether you want to turn the Democratic Party into a party of the working class, whether you believe that status quo politics was enough. So I think the question, the litmus test that we're going to have to face as a Democratic Party over the next few weeks is beating Trump and Trumpism enough, or do we want to both beat Trump and transform our American political and economic system? And that is, I think, one of the challenges that we're going to have as we go forward, is making this case not only sufficient to just beat Donald Trump. And in order to defeat him, you're going to have this massive grassroots energy, massive multicultural movement that we are building that has a lot of passion in it and has the ability to attract people who aren't ordinary voters, something I think Joe Biden's campaign isn't able to claim.
Elizabeth Warren's candidacy right now, do you believe that she helps or hurts your cause at this moment? Her staying in this race, her campaigning hard. She's in Michigan today. That's where she wants to give her speech tonight. She's sending a message in Michigan. Does she hurt your chances of winning Michigan?
Listen, I have a firm philosophy on Elizabeth Warren's campaign, which is if the shoe were on the other foot, how would you act? And I think she has a strong campaign, a lot of supporters, a lot of financial resources. She's built up a very strong campaign over the course of many months. And I would far be it from me to try to dictate or suggest ideas about how best to run their campaign. That's what I would expect on the other end of this, is if we were in that position. I was like, hey, you know, I don't need to hear. We need to make decisions and judgments about what is best for our strategic interests, and I'll leave them the time and space to make those determinations.
All right, Faz Shakur, it's going to be an interesting night. I'm sure you're anxious to get into your boiler room. Frankly, I'm anxious to get to our boiler room and start seeing some numbers. So thanks for coming on and sharing your views.
Thank you, Chuck. Talk to you soon.
Let me get to, from the other side over here, Democratic Senator from Delaware, big Biden supporter Chris Coons. Senator Coons, you have been with Joe Biden from the beginning. You're here now. Do you feel vindicated watching the last 48 hours, considering all the epitaphs that were being written, maybe written too soon about your candidate?
Well, Chuck, that's right. After the first 4 contests, Joe Biden has more popular votes than any other candidate in this race. And I think what we saw in South Carolina with his decisive win and last night with those truly significant historic endorsements by Amy Klobuchar, by Pete Buttigieg, by Beto O'Rourke, by Harry Reid, and by many others yesterday and today is that the Democratic Party realizes that beating Donald Trump is the thing this fall, and Joe Biden is the candidate who can bring us together, who can restore dignity to the White House, who can make real on Donald Trump's broken promises to America's middle class, and who's got the experience and the vision to move us forward. So to your question, Chuck, do I think early reports of the demise of the Biden campaign were premature? Yes. All along, Joe knew that the folks in South Carolina would have his back, and they came out in droves for him. And I'm very optimistic that in a half dozen states tonight we'll see similar results.
Do you accept Jim Clyburn's critique of the Biden campaign that it's been a bit wanting, and that he's not going to sit quietly anymore like he did before since he hadn't been on? I mean, do you think some changes need to be made in order to get this campaign ready to beat Sanders at the convention?
Look, anybody like Congressman Clyburn who wants to offer not just his critical and historic endorsement, but advice and insight, and roll up his sleeves and get involved in moving this campaign forward, which he is more than welcome. Of course, there's ways that any campaign can be tuned up. And now that Joe is ready and raring to go across a whole nationwide scope tonight and in the weeks to come, the help of Congressman Clyburn, who's one of the most senior members of the House, one of the most significant leaders of our party, is certainly welcome.
You have a message for Michael Bloomberg?
Mayor Bloomberg is someone who respects data and who is clear-eyed and tough, has brought a lot of resources to advancing progressive causes and a lot of resources to this campaign. And my hope is that, like Senator Klobuchar, like Mayor Buttigieg, if the numbers tonight just do not bear out that he has a clear and credible path to the nomination, my hope would be that he would do the right thing and consider offering his support to former Vice President Joe Biden. My hope is that that'll be the result after tonight, and we'll have some great opportunities here in the days ahead to talk about what working together might seem like.
Do you think we're getting to a situation where after tonight, if it's a two-person race, it means the idea of a contested convention is over?
Well, you know, the rules as we have them is that whoever ends up getting 51% of the delegates of the votes on the floor of the convention is who is our nominee. And I think if it's gone from a field of, Chuck, you'll remember how many was it when we started, 22, 26?
25 maybe at one point if you count Mike Gravel, you know, in his second run.
Now that we're down to a much smaller field, if after tonight and the contest of the next week or two, it really does come down to Biden versus Sanders, which is where I think we're headed, I agree with you that that means that the convention in Milwaukee should be a fairly straightforward exercise and opportunity for the whole Democratic Party to come together around the candidate who has delivered real results, who doesn't just have plans, who doesn't give speeches, but who has a record that we can run on and he can govern on, and that's Joe Biden.
Bernie Sanders has said his running mate has to support Medicare for all. It was sort of a hint that he says, no, I'm not going to create a unity ticket. Do you think Joe Biden, if he is the nominee, needs to think about a running mate that reaches out to the Sanders coalition?
I think Joe has and will reach out to the whole range of the Democratic Party. That's why his win in South Carolina was so decisive, and that's why he'll do well tonight, is that he connects with and speaks to progressives and moderates, black and brown and white Democrats, folks who are, you know, male and female, rich and poor, of all backgrounds, and all interests and inclinations and orientations. He is someone who has fought hard for organized labor, fought hard for progressive causes, and has a real record of improving access to high-quality, affordable health care. I do think that as he weighs who ought to be his running mate, he'll do so with an eye towards bringing together everyone in the Democratic Party.
Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, in Washington, I take it right now. Thank you. Much appreciated. Right after the break, more exit polling numbers ahead. Plus, the White House Coronavirus Task Force is holding an off-camera briefing right now. We will get you the headlines from that as the death toll here, sadly, in the U.S. has risen. Stay with us. Welcome back. We'll have more Super Tuesday coverage ahead, but first an update on the coronavirus across the country. The number of people infected has risen. Here's what we know. Since January, at least 15 states have reported COVID-19 cases, with more than 100 people infected nationwide, half of which were evacuated from Wuhan, China, and the Diamond Princess cruise ship. Washington State remains the hardest hit in the country now, with 9 deaths reported as of today. This afternoon, President Trump toured the vaccine lab at the National Institute of Health. He has suggested a vaccine could be months away, though researchers say it is closer to a year out. Meantime, today, health officials testified on Capitol Hill on the vaccine development, diagnostic test availability, and patient treatment. One of those experts testifying, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci, gave this ominous quote to Politico, quote, "I don't think that we are going to get out of this completely unscathed. I think that this is going to be one of those things we look back on and say, boy, that was bad." And in fact, today, the top official at the World Health Organization said the virus has killed about 3.4% of people with reported cases globally. That is higher than previous estimates that were around 2%. But at this moment, that number is still well below the fatality rates of other coronaviruses like SARS and MERS. We'll, of course, continue to bring you new information on the virus and the response as it develops. Up next, our Super Tuesday coverage will continue. Kornacki will have new exit polling data for us at the big board. Keep it here. Welcome back to MSNBC's special coverage of Super Tuesday. We've got just over an hour before the first polls close. Vermont and Virginia, we see you. But we are learning more and more about who is voting as information keeps rolling in from our NBC News exit polls. Joining us for more numbers, Steve Kornacki at the big board. Still with us, Andrea, David, and Maria Teresa. All right, Steve, give us Give us what we're going to be talking about for the next 5 minutes.
Well, we want to show you a little bit of the demographic variance. We told you the last time we were here, it's a 14% black electorate nationally in the Super Tuesday states, but there are wide geographic variances in that. So let me show you, because obviously you saw in South Carolina, the black vote went one particular way. We'll see if that happens tonight. But if you call this the South, okay, Oklahoma and all these states in here, the yellow states, they're the Super Tuesday states here. The electorate in these states today collectively is 20% black. Okay, then if you go next door here to Texas, 21% black. And if you go out to California, it's only 7% black. So some big differences there. That's one thing to keep in mind as you see returns come in from these different regions. There's a large Hispanic population in Texas, obviously, and a very large Hispanic population in California, not so much in the Southeast. In Minnesota, Massachusetts, the big states up here, single digit, mid-low single digit number in terms of African Americans. So that's one to keep in mind. The other is ideology. We've also seen that, the moderate conservative wing of the Democratic Party. That's a fairly big wing here. We showed you that nationally, but take a look here. Again, there is wide variance. If you look at the Southeast here, 45% Democratic primary voters in these states tonight called themselves moderate or conservative. The number in Texas checks in at 42. The number out in California checks in at 32. And again, the number up here in Massachusetts and Minnesota, it's back there in the low mid-30s. So again, you're seeing some ideological differences between sort of the northern tier here, California, versus Texas and the Southeast.
Well, you are also showing why this is an interesting time zone challenge for the Sanders campaign, because it feels as if Biden has got coalitions or hints of things good for him on the East Coast, and as we move west, things get better for Bernie.
Yep.
Should be very interesting. Kornacki, we will let you go. Maria Teresa, what do you think?
Well, I think it's going to come back to California and Texas, quite frankly. And you are seeing, I always say that Texas is where California was ideologically about 25 years ago. The folks there, even though they can check off Democrat, they're more moderate. They're more, and so I think that Biden's going to take Texas and Bernie's going to take California, and we'll see where it lies of folks that early voted already for the candidates that unfortunately are out. Like, how does that actually coalesce? That is exciting.
I have to say, David, the other part of this is we're seeing so much volatility in the last few days. Democratic primary voters really were playing pundit. I think more than we had ever seen before. Usually it's just Iowa and New Hampshire voters that do this. This seems to be across the board. People were thinking, tell me who the candidate's supposed to be, and then I'll vote for that person.
Yeah.
We're seeing evidence of this all over.
I mean, I don't know if we'll know this down to the person. We won't statistically, but how many people had their ballot and held on to it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Until to see what happened in South Carolina. I think it was a lot of
in
these
California,
states.
60% of the folks, so early voters in California were folks that were voting for the first time and that were low propensity.
Those were Bernie
voters.
voters.
Were high, exactly right. I was actually talking to the Secretary of State earlier, and he's like, well, I don't know. But no, high propensity voters in California held onto the ballots.
But you know who these people are? The people playing pundits and holding onto their votes? What was the most important thing?
Right now,
it was electability. They wanted to know who could defeat Donald Trump.
That's exactly right.
And so that's why they wanted to see who could do well on the debate stage. They
By the way, you know what they're saying? Without saying it, they've already, this is to me Bernie Sanders' challenge now for the next 3 months. These voters already have it in their heads he can't win. He has to convince, even though he can't win these voters over, he has to figure out how to convince these voters, no, he's a safe bet too. I don't know if
he
he
doesn't
can.
do it tonight, I don't know how he does.
I mean, the other thing that's interesting when you look at the demographic information, we'll see ultimately how Sanders performs. But if he performs well with the Latino vote generally across the board, if you look at the states coming up, because if you're Biden or Sanders, how do I grow and eat into my main competition's base? So what's interesting is obviously in New York, you've got a lot of Puerto Rican, a lot of Dominican voters, Florida, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Arizona, more like a California. So if you're Biden's campaign, you think, how can I grow into that? Just as Sanders hasn't to date, but can he dent the African American? So I think we're going to learn a lot about today, but we have to understand that, to your point, African American and Latino voters in these states differ by state.
Maria Teresa, what is we know what Bernie's done positively. You and I have talked about this, that the Latino Democrats are probably the angrier than any other electorate, and in many ways Bernie speaks to that better than most. What does Biden have to do to excite this electorate the way Bernie's excited it?
One of the things, when Biden was in the White House, I have to say that he was one of the few folks that I saw an actual evolution of understanding what Latinos faced. He and I would often talk about how he understood the law, not in the beginning of the presidency, but towards the end, of how the immigrant experience of his Irish grandparents, like he understood that. And he understood that that's the same barriers that Latinos are facing. He needs to speak to that experience, and he needs to speak to the fact that the reason Latinos are so angry is because we're afraid. Under this president, under President Trump, the levels of anxiety among 3-year-olds is through the roof. The #1 issue among Latino parents when it comes to health for their kids is mental health. This is not a game. And in Texas, we must remember the fact that someone jumped into a car to drive 10 hours to send a message. In his creed, it was to stave off the Mexican invasion and to stop the Latino voting bloc. He needs to speak to where we are today.
And the fact is, he's very powerful when he says that Bernie Sanders voted all those years ago against an immigration plan that Teddy Kennedy, that Joe Biden and others would have led to millions more documented people right now, people who could be legal. But what he has to face is the anger over the deportation policies.
Exactly right.
We have another collective exit poll number that we like to look at, and that is return to Obama, basically the evolution versus revolution question, okay? Return to Obama's policy, become more liberal, the revolution question, or be more conservative. Basically, if you combine the conservative to return to Obama, that's at 55, more liberal, 38. David Plouffe, what that tells me is, boy, that's a lot of the South speaking, if you will, Tennessee, Arkansas, Texas, and that's a little bit of California speaking on the liberal side. I think that shows you if this electorate leans Biden on that messaging, where does the electorate ever get more liberal for Sanders?
No, I think as you look at the rest of the calendar, it's going to get more centrist. So, and it's not just the South. I mean, you've got parts of Massachusetts, the Iron Range in Minnesota, where I'll be really interested to unpack, how Biden does in those places. But that is a really important proxy. And my guess is it mirrors, if you look at what does Biden get, what does Bloomberg get, what does Warren get, what does Sanders, it's probably going to be closer than not.
Let me throw out another one, another marker tonight. How many states does Bernie Sanders surpass 40% in? And how many states does Joe Biden surpass 40%? Is that I don't know many places Sanders gets north of 40. It does feel like we could see where Biden might get north of 40 in 3 or 4 places.
Vermont and Colorado, perhaps, for Sanders.
Yeah. And then
well, it's interesting.
All the
Hillary ended up winning Minnesota, right? Bernie won Minnesota.
Bernie won Minnesota. They were caucuses the last time.
This is the first
time they were primary. And that's an interesting little thing that may, the irony is, that's one of those things they changed that may have hurt.
Who wins Massachusetts?
Bernie. Guess what? We'll ask our friends. Maybe we'll see what happens at 8 o'clock when polls close in Massachusetts. How about that? Andrea, David, Marie Teresa. Thank you all. Happy Super Tuesday. We'll be right back. Well, that's it for Meet the Press Daily tonight. But I'm going to see you at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're going to start our NBC News coverage on NBC News Now, our streaming special there. Virginia, in Vermont, polls close there. Super Tuesday coverage begins. Apple TV, Roku, NBCNews.com. MSNBC's special Super Tuesday coverage, guess what? That starts right now.
Super Tuesday.
We are more than a campaign. We are a movement.
One day, 14 states, from California to Maine. The biggest delegate jackpot yet.
This campaign is taking off.
Biden's landslide victory in South Carolina, shaking up the race. The field dramatically narrowing.
I'm delighted to endorse and support Joe Biden for president.
I am ending my campaign and endorsing Joe Biden for president.
Can Biden sweep the South?
It's time to get back up. And so get up. Let's take back this country.
Can Sanders pull away from the pack?
The economic establishment and the political establishment are becoming very nervous.
For the first time, Bloomberg is on the ballot.
I'm in it to win it.
And Warren is keeping up the fight.
The time to choose is upon us, and I'm ready to get to work.
With the delegate race neck and neck, will a clear nominee emerge tonight? Leading our coverage, Brian Williams, Rachel Maddow, Nicole Wallace, Steve Kornacki at the big board, our political team across the country, the road warriors tracking the candidates, plus Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Eugene Robinson, our strategist, former Senator Claire McCaskill, Obama campaign manager David Plouffe, Obama White House press secretary Robert Gibbs. MSNBC's special coverage starts now.
This is the biggest night so far. The single largest day of the primary calendar is upon us. Everything on the line as voters in 14 states and 1 American territory head to the polls. 1,344 delegates up for grabs today, fully 1/3 of the number you need to win the nomination. In just 1 hour's time, the first polls close in Virginia and Vermont, the latter, of course, the home state of Bernie Sanders. Then it's truly off to the races. Down south we go to North Carolina at 7:30. Then state by state as we work our way west with the time zones all the way to the largest prize of the night, California. We've got our reporters fanned out across this country at polling sites and with the candidates. Good evening once again. Brian Williams here in New York with Rachel Maddow.
Tonight, the frontrunner, Bernie Sanders, will be trying to pile up enough delegates for an insurmountable lead. That is something that seemed much more likely for him before the events of the last 72 hours. A decisive win by Vice President Joe Biden in South Carolina, followed by 3 of the other Democratic contenders dropping out of the race. 2 of them, Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, then endorsing Vice President Biden last night in person, live in Texas.
Then there's also what happened over the last 24 hours. Biden picked up endorsements from Beto O'Rourke, Harry Reid, Susan Rice, to name a few. We saw the effect Jim Clyburn's endorsement had in South Carolina. Will these new endorsements all combined translate into late deciders, into votes? One thing we should know by the end of the night.
Whether Mike Bloomberg's $500 million earned him any delegates is going to be something that we're watching for tonight. Tonight, of course, will be the first time that Bloomberg is actually on the ballot anywhere. Bloomberg, of course, is just one of the X factors here. The other is Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, who has signaled that she is in it for the long haul. Her campaign signaling that her goal tonight is to rack up delegates as many places as she can, with the expectation that it will be a brokered convention that picks the nominee at the end of the day in Milwaukee this summer.
We start where we should, at the big board. All eyes are upon it, and our man Steve Kornacki with our first look at what's going on out there, Steve.
Hey, Brian, well, here we go. We've got exit poll data that's starting to come in. It's starting to give us a sense of what that electorate out there today looks like. The folks going to the polls, what are some of their demographic characteristics? There's a lot we can show you. I want to start on this one, though, because last Saturday in South Carolina, this is a number that stood out at me. The share of the electorate, when you ask this question of Democratic voters, should the next president's policies be a return to Barack Obama's, or should they be a change in either a more liberal or conservative direction? And why this stood out to me is last Saturday, when we had those dramatic developments in South Carolina, it was the highest number we had seen in the primaries to date, and that number was 53 in South Carolina. And you're seeing, this is the Southeast tonight. And the number you're seeing in the Southeast on this question is 50. That is very close, obviously, to the number we saw in South Carolina over the weekend. And that gets to one of the biggest questions coming in tonight. Was South Carolina a harbinger for Joe Biden of what was to come in the broader South tonight? That's one of the key components he's going to need if he's going to have the kind of delegate night he's hoping for. So take a look. That's what we're seeing in the exit poll on this question. How would that translate? What would that mean when you start looking at the map tonight? So look at it this way. In yellow, you're going to see here, these are the states that are up tonight. This is sort of the Southeast region right here. These are the states we're including in that exit poll. Biden tonight, if he could get South Carolina-like numbers in some of the areas around here, he could start racking up delegates here. That is something that was very much in question a few days ago. That would be one component he needs. The story, you mentioned this, before South Carolina, everybody in the world assumed that at the end of tonight, Bernie Sanders would have a big delegate lead, hundreds of delegates. But if Biden can run up numbers down here, if he can be close, if he can be about even in Texas, that would be one of his campaign's goals. If he can make the viability threshold, you'll hear about that a lot tonight in California, be over 15% in collecting delegates. And if he can do that in big states like Massachusetts and Minnesota as well, he has a chance to be competitive in that delegate race with Bernie Sanders at the end of tonight. And if you just think back to a week ago, when everybody would have guessed Biden is down 300 or 400, the question a week ago was, how big will Bernie Sanders' lead be after Super Tuesday tonight? The question coming in tonight is a new one. Will Bernie Sanders have a delegate lead after Super Tuesday?
Steve, can I ask you a little bit of an extrapolation question on that delegate math? We've heard so much discussion, so much punditry, so much, like, frankly, agita from Democrats about the prospect that nobody's going to have a majority heading into the convention, that no candidate will have actually technically locked up the nomination. It might have to be decided at the convention. Those projections, that expectation, is that changing at all based on where we are in the delegate math tonight and on what the sort of revised expectations are for tonight?
Yeah, well, that is a question we're going to see, and it very much has to do. When I mentioned the viability threshold a minute ago, we might as well put that out there right now. This number, 15. Every time I show you a result tonight, whether I'm showing you a statewide result, a congressional district result, pay attention to which candidates are above and below 15%. There's an assumption that Sanders is probably going to be over it pretty much everywhere. There's now an assumption that Biden's probably going to be pretty much over it elsewhere. But when it comes to Warren and when it comes to Bloomberg, are they running above 15%? If so, they're starting to collect delegates. Are they running above 15 in California? They can get a lot of delegates. Texas, they can get a lot of delegates. Is Warren winning her home state of Massachusetts? She can get a lot of delegates. If you want to talk about a brokered convention scenario coming at it tonight, it would depend on Warren and Bloomberg, at the very least, hitting that threshold in a lot of places and being able to collect hundreds of delegates rather than dozens of delegates.
Fascinating. Thank you, Steve.
Steve Kornacki at the big board. Long lines in Dallas, Texas this afternoon, where the second biggest delegate haul is tonight. Joe Biden is pulling out all the stops to try to win Texas after that big endorsement derby last night. Our own Garrett Hake, native Texan, is tonight in Houston for us. Hey, Garrett.
Hey, Brian, we've got long lines here, too, about 2.5-hour wait. I'm at the busiest polling location in Harris County, the biggest county in Texas. More people live in Harris County, which includes Houston, than do in Iowa and New Hampshire combined. Gives you a sense of the scale of what's at stake here, potentially, for Joe Biden. I'm in a place in the northwest Harris County. This is more like Audi and Tesla, Texas, less F-150, Texas. This is still a place where you would expect a Joe Biden or a Mike Bloomberg to potentially do well, to want to do well, to pick up some of those suburban voters, ex-Republicans, folks who are just turned off by the Trump presidency. Also, significant African-American vote in Houston as well. Anecdotally, walking around all day at this polling place talking to voters, I'm hearing from a lot of folks who are deciding late. They were looking at other candidates. Their candidates may be out, or they may have been unimpressed with Mike Bloomberg. Those folks are telling me they're going with Biden.
Garrett Hake with one of the factoids we may return to tonight. Harris County, Texas, more vote than the first two states in this race.
Also, 2.5-hour lines.
Combined.
I mean, that itself is a factor. I mean, A, it's interesting in terms of whether it means a lot of people are turning out, but also, are those people going to stick it out? Are those people going to actually wait 2.5 hours to cast their vote, or are they going to bail?
That's a commitment. Chris Jansing is at a polling location in Austin, the seat of Travis County, which split evenly between Sanders and Clinton back in 2016, and where Sanders has been making a strong push there. Chris?
Yeah, and it's obviously a blue city that's in the middle of a red state. And so one of the things that we've been looking for is how much Bernie support would we see. He has a lot of good feeling left over from 4 years ago. And if there was good turnout, the local experts kept telling me, absolutely is going to favor Bernie. Then I talked to them again today, 2 days later, and they said, hold on, that might have all changed or at least shifted a bit because of what's happened over the last 24 hours. Let me give you the numbers, Brian, because I just got off the phone with county officials as you look at this line that is more than an hour long. Back in 2016, 230,000 people total voted early and on day of. It's already up to 223, and we still have almost 2 hours of the busiest time. Let me talk to Terry Lynn here. Tell me your decision. How early did you make it?
I made my decision pretty much right when all the candidates announced themselves, when it was down to about 6.
And it is?
It is going to be Joe Biden, the moderate, and the former vice president of the United States of America.
She is definitely somebody who's on Team Biden, but I talked to 23 people in this line over the last, half hour or so. 8 people have changed their mind in the last 24 hours. 2 are making a game time decision. So exactly what the local experts are telling me, even though you would think these big numbers might lean toward Bernie, don't necessarily count on the old ways of thinking holding this time, Brian.
All right, Chris Jansing, fascinating stuff about late deciders and then some. The spoiler of this night, potentially, in some of these states, could be the man from New York who has already spent more than the combined payroll of the LA Dodgers, I learned on our 4 o'clock broadcast today. Mike Bloomberg is on the ballot after all this spending and all these TV spots and all this noise. For the first time tonight, following him is our own Josh Letterman in West Palm, Florida. The Florida primary, of course, 2 weeks away. Hey, Josh.
Yeah, intense pressure tonight on Mike Bloomberg to bow out of the race, clear a path for Joe Biden. Brian, we've been talking to Democratic officials, senior people within the party, people who have a lot of influence, who have acknowledged that they have been in touch with the Bloomberg campaign, trying to make the case that now is the time, for the sake of party unity, for him to step aside, particularly as the party really coalesces behind Joe Biden. So far, no indications that's going to take place. I just spoke to a person who's close to the campaign who was saying, look, things changed pretty rapidly on South Carolina primary day just a few days ago. That the Bloomberg campaign knew it was going to be a good night for Joe Biden. They did not anticipate that he was going to be able to resuscitate his campaign quite the way he did, and that he would emerge from South Carolina looking like the strongest moderate in the race. But so far, Mike Bloomberg has been defiant. We heard from him earlier this morning in Miami, where he said that he's not taking votes away from Joe Biden. Joe Biden's taking votes away from him. And he said that his path to the nomination, if there is one, is now through a contested convention where nobody gets a majority of delegates, and then they duke it out at the convention. And he hopes ultimately side with Mike Bloomberg. But that's obviously creating some heartburn tonight in the party as they anticipate the prospect of a contested convention. Brian?
Thanks, Josh.
Interesting, too, that they're in Florida and not in one of the Super Tuesday states.
I noted
tonight.
that.
It's been fascinating to think about. I mean, Bloomberg. Listen,
the 15th of March that they've had in Florida. It's not even. Yeah.
And Bloomberg, I mean, Bloomberg is doing something. Giuliani tried to do this, remember?
Yeah,
Giuliani tried to start the Republican primary campaign in Florida. And by the time Florida, he just got steamrolled.
Completely irrelevant by the time Florida came out.
Nobody has ever done this before. But still, it's striking to hear Letterman say that the Bloomberg campaign is experiencing intense pressure from multiple sources inside the Democratic Party that he needs to quit.
It's also been reported and talked about that there is some tension within the Bloomberg camp, that it's Mike Bloomberg himself who said, I've spent all these millions, and I'm not I don't know a lot of billionaires, but I guess even billionaires are a little persnickety about their millions and millions of dollars. You know, why would I get out now? But what's interesting about the Bloomberg team is it's the same very skilled, very astute operatives, Kevin Sheekey, Howard Wolfson. They've added our friend Tim O'Brien, who made a calculation not to play in 2016 so as not to harm Hillary Clinton and help Donald Trump. So they seem to be at this point making the opposite calculation about Joe Biden, who in South Carolina assembled a larger vote.
Why did they decide to start halfway through the process, though? Why did they decide to let the 4 early states go?
No, because they came in, they did start late, and they decided they just couldn't catch up in those first 4 states, and it wouldn't look good. And so aim at Super Tuesday. Meanwhile, carpet bomb the entire nation with you know, a couple $300–400 million worth of television advertising, and you know it was effective. I mean, it got him from 0 to 20 in the polls. What he didn't anticipate was South Carolina, and the fact that would give such new impetus and new life to the Biden campaign. He didn't anticipate Jim Clyburn, and the push he gave to Biden. Didn't anticipate that overwhelming African-American vote that we may see translate into similar support in these other southeastern states tonight. So he thought he was going to be looking like the strongest moderate by the time we got to Super Tuesday, and that's not necessarily the case.
I mean, look, all politicians walk the line between audacity and hubris, and he fell over to the hubris side when he bombed in the first debate. You can't just carpet bomb the airwaves and then not, when you're standing there in the flesh, perform or look like you even prepared to try to perform.
Honestly, though, even if he had done spectacularly in that debate, though, don't you think that starting in the 5th state? I mean, we've all been through this now. I mean, we've seen them go from whatever it was, 20 gazillion candidates down to the 4 or 5 that remain. I mean, it does feel like we've lived 1,000 lives inside this primary already. And to say, okay, today is day 1, it just, how is it going to work no matter how good
I mean, I guess said at the time it was crazy, and then it looked like, gee, maybe it's working, and now it's back to, no, it was crazy.
But I mean, the elephant in the room is that Biden was sucking wind. I mean, the entire Bloomberg dream
Was
is
predicated.
based
Yeah,
on the Biden nightmare. It was predicated on the Trump-Giuliani months-long smear campaign that culminated in what Donald Trump thinks was a good bet. He thinks it was worth getting impeached to muddy up Joe Biden and his family. So Bloomberg got in when that was the political backdrop.
Until less than 72 hours ago, Joe Biden was still sucking wind, particularly on fundraising. And so one of the things that's going to get tested tonight is Bloomberg, with all the money in the world, now trying in this death match with Biden tonight. Biden running in Super Tuesday on no money. He has spent nowhere in these states. And that competition, it's, yeah, you can look at it dollar to dollar, but ultimately it's going to be vote to vote.
Free media, paid media.
Yeah.
We are, what are we, 40 away from our first polls close, well within this coming hour. We already have numbers on the breakdown of voters along racial lines as they went to the polls tonight. A lot more of the exit polling, which may indicate what kind of a night we're going to be covering here. Our live coverage continues right after this. Just over 38 minutes to go until our first poll closing of the night. And as we welcome you back, let's speak a little English here. Looking at the publicly available data from the exit polls, first wave tonight, it would certainly indicate we are about to cover a volatile election night in 14 states across the country. More of the numbers coming in to Steve Kornacki, who is at the big board. Steve?
Yeah, Brian. And again, what we saw on Saturday night, one of the things we saw on Saturday night, obviously, if you were watching, you know, the importance of the black vote. Last Saturday in South Carolina was the first major test of support from black voters. We've got a bunch more tonight. And one thing I can show you, demographically, there's a lot of variance here, but there are a bunch of states with significant black voting populations tonight. We're finding out just how big those voting populations are. So at Virginia, by the way, in about 40 minutes, we're going to start getting numbers from Virginia. 27% of the electorate tonight is black. That is the same number our exit poll is saying in North Carolina. Next door in Tennessee, the number is 26. In Alabama, it is the biggest number of the night, 44. We actually don't have exit poll data for Arkansas, but I can tell you last time around in 2016, it was 27. And in Texas tonight, it is 20. These are states with significant black populations. Now, I want to draw your attention to one other number. As you look at these, this is the black population here. In 2016, Bernie Sanders, in his campaign against Hillary Clinton, did not win a single state where the black population was over 21. So that's a big question to keep in mind when you look at all these states right here. With the exception of Texas, any one of these states in the Southeast tonight, according to our exit poll, if Sanders were to win it, he would be doing something he was unable to do in 2016. So let's keep an eye on those numbers as they come in tonight. And obviously, you look at Texas, it's 20. That number for him, that ceiling for him in 2016, was 21.
Steve Kornacki, can I just ask you one, this admittedly a picayune point here, but I know that we sometimes get an age bias in the different waves of exit polls, that the exit polls show us a different age demographic than we ultimately end up with when we first start looking at that first wave. Is that also true historically in terms of race, that the early numbers actually tend to be different than what we ultimately find out?
Yeah, it can be, and we've seen it. I will tell you, watching these results come in the last couple of nights here, the last couple of big nights we've been here, I've seen more variance from the early numbers in the caucus states to what they finally became versus the primary states. We didn't see a ton, to be honest with you, in South Carolina last week.
Thank you, Steve. Much appreciated.
Let's bring in our friends, former Missouri Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill and former chief engineer of the Obama 08 victory, David Plouffe. New book, by the way, A Citizen's Guide to Beating Donald Trump, is out today. Timing. Secret to life is timing. Good evening to you both. Claire, starting with you, we're going to talk about delegates in just a hot second, but tell us the story of your political party tonight. What do you think is happening?
Well, speaking as a political scientist as opposed to a partisan, tonight is really exciting, frankly, because we don't have good polling. You know, the big change in the election occurred on Saturday, and it's only 3 days, and we have this massive amount of delegates that will be awarded tonight. And I don't know why, but I've been thinking of Paul McCartney all day as it relates to Bloomberg. Can't buy me love. And I do think that that may end up being the story tonight, not just that Biden does better than anyone anticipated a couple of weeks ago, but that money, whether you're Tom Steyer or Mike Bloomberg, does not connect you with voters.
David Plouffe, what is the delegate calculus going into tonight? And if you care to predict where we're going to be at the end of this long night?
Well, I don't know about a firm prediction, but here's what I know. I think a resuscitated Joe Biden likes the rest of the states remaining in the primary process more than Bernie Sanders. I think states like Florida, Missouri, Georgia, and Mississippi, he could net a lot of delegates. So it's incumbent that Bernie Sanders maximize his delegate yield tonight. And I think California is the cornerstone of that. How many delegates can he walk out of California? And Joe Biden, the question is, in North Carolina, in Virginia, in Tennessee, in Alabama, can he come close to offsetting the Sanders yield? So this is a completely different race. And to Claire's point, momentum is clearly trumping money. Now, if you're the Biden campaign, you'd like to match some money with the momentum so that you fully capitalize on the rest of the states in March, just starting next Tuesday. But that's really the delegate question. I think even on Saturday night, Brian, when we knew Biden won South Carolina, we were discussing here, well, maybe Biden can keep Bernie's delegate advantage coming out of Super Tuesday to 150. You know, if it's a lot closer to that, this is a fundamentally different race than any of us could have imagined really 72 hours ago.
David, you were so emphatic on the night of the South Carolina primary as those results were coming in that only Biden or Bernie Sanders have the chance, basically, to put together enough delegates for a nomination that it's a two-man race. It's not technically a two-man race. Bloomberg is there, and he's still a black box. Elizabeth Warren is there, and while she hasn't been placing 1 and 2 in these races, she's contending in lots of places right now and saying there's no chance she's getting out. Do you see Bloomberg and Warren not necessarily having a path to the nomination, but as having an impact here that's something more than spoiler? How do you see their campaigns tonight, both in terms of their goals and their impact?
Well, Rachel, the reason I was so clear about that is I just looked at who can grow into the 30s and 40s, which is how you get delegates in terms of percentage. And really, given Biden's performance and his strength with the African-American community, and Bernie already having a very strong base, I really see those as the two folks. So if Bloomberg and Warren get delegates today, and I think they'll get some, the question is, do they have a path to the nomination? Actually, both campaigns have now said, no, they don't think they can become the nominee by winning the most delegates. So it's a convention play, which I do think is far-fetched. Now, they can have a role because they can say, whatever delegates I've had, I've endorsed X or I've endorsed Y, and I'd love my delegates to go to who have I endorsed. Now, those delegates at that point are free agents, the pledged delegates. But I think it stands to reason that those delegates will probably follow pretty closely what, Bloomberg or Warren say. But I think that's where they're left right now. And I think that I thought this was a two-person race on Saturday night. My suspicion is come tomorrow morning, it'll be incontrovertible that either it's Sanders or Biden that's going to face off against Trump.
And Claire, let's talk about the part that polite people don't discuss over the dinner table, and that is the firmly cleaved two sides in the Democratic Party. Long piece in the New York Times over the past 24 hours about what happened when the moderates realized that Bernie was getting so much traction. That goes right on through tonight.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to remember is the people that were worried were people that are Democrats that stand for elections in places that are much different and in districts that are much different than the overall votes in, say, a California or a Massachusetts. You take majorities, we don't have enough bright blue states to get majorities in Congress. So you have to find suburban districts that are capable of being blue or red. You have to find states like Michigan and Ohio that have, capability of being either blue or red. And in those states, those Democrats knew on the ground that it was worrisome that if Bernie was the nominee for the rest of the ballot. And that's what kind of was, but keep in mind, this didn't happen until Joe Biden did better. Joe Biden, first he did better, and then everyone stood up and said, okay, let's go.
And right before we go to a break, one of the states where folks are voting tonight is the scene of a horrendous tragedy overnight and a death toll now at 25 at our airtime. What's happening in Tennessee as a result?
In terms of the voting in Tennessee, this has just been reported by the AP, and I should tell you that NBC News has not confirmed this, so this is Associated Press reporting. But per the AP, a judge has extended voting hours in the second largest county in Tennessee, Davidson County. The Democratic presidential candidates, apparently 4 candidates, sued to keep the polls open after the tornado damage in the Nashville area. And so we are expecting that will mean that polls wholesale in Davidson County will be open an extra hour. There may be even further poll extensions at some of the combined sort of mega polling places in Tennessee. We'll keep you apprised on this now. We're just getting early word of this judge's ruling in the state.
We are thinking about all our friends in the Music City tonight. Another break for us as the hour approaches. We'll hear what the campaigns have planned for this big night. Got some pictures coming in when Garrett Haake talked about those 2.5-hour lines to vote in Harris County, Houston, Texas. This is the kind of thing we're talking about. Luckily, a mild night. They're all neighbors. They're all having a good time, and they're all determined to get in there and cast their vote. Let's check in with 2 of our road warriors covering the top 2 campaigns on the Democratic side. Shaquille Brewster, who covers the Sanders effort for us, is in Essex Junction. I'll get it out. That also happens to be a town in Vermont. And Mike Memley covering the Biden campaign. We can find him tonight in Los Angeles. Shaq, we'll start with you. What's the Sanders camp telling you?
Well, the campaign is looking forward to tonight. You know, Fashaker, he was on MSNBC earlier today. That's Senator Sanders' campaign manager. And the word that you're hearing from them is something that I've been hearing through aides and advisors all day now. It's that they're walking into Super Tuesday with a delegate lead, and that they hope to come out of Super Tuesday with an even bigger delegate lead. And where are they focusing? Well, you can look at Senator Sanders' campaign schedule for that, where he's been traveling. He spent a lot of time in the state of California. He has hundreds of staff members there. They've been knocking on millions of doors, over 1 million doors in the state of California. They're also focused on Texas, and just before he came to Vermont here, he was in Utah and Minnesota, the home state of Senator Amy Klobuchar. So this campaign feels good about what they're seeing out west. The X factor, of course, is what is going to happen with those southern states. We know coming from South Carolina, where Vice President Biden had that really big lead and that really big win over the course of this weekend, and then followed by those endorsements. What impact do those endorsements have on Senator Sanders' support? That's something that his campaign definitely is watching. Brian?
Shaq, thanks. Now all the way west to Mike Memley in L.A. Mike, what are you hearing?
Well, Brian, heading into the first 2 contests of this primary process in Iowa and New Hampshire, the Biden campaign was doing such a convincing job of lowering expectations about what they expected from their candidate that essentially they dropped all pretense of spinning, that we knew he was in for a really rough night. Tonight, I'm taking my cues not from the campaign so much as I'm taking them from the candidate himself. I'm not sure if we have the pictures just yet, but Biden is already in Los Angeles. He made the first of what we expect might be several local stops here in the city. He was wearing his aviators, and he was having a chocolate chip ice cream cone. As the kids would say, that is peak Biden. They clearly feel like the momentum over the last few days has carried them into Super Tuesday, and that the formula from South Carolina will expand across the map tonight.
His 2 weaknesses, Ray-Bans and any sort of ice cream product. Mike Memley, thank you for that. Jeff Bennett standing by, Falls Church, Virginia. That is the first poll closing of the night, what we're waiting for at the top of the hour. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Brian, and we've seen huge turnout here at Marshall High School. One of the reasons why we're here is because this polling place historically has been among the busiest. And around 1 p.m. Eastern, this polling place had already surpassed, in terms of turnout, the numbers that they were doing back in 2016. So that's certainly something to watch. But this region generally, one of the reasons why this is such a key region for all of the candidates is because the Northern Virginia suburbs are largely, this region is what is responsible for shifting Virginia from red to blue during Trump's time in office. Democrats here now control the governor's mansion. They also control the state legislature. And this area is literally home to the D.C. establishment. You've got the White House, Capitol Hill, the Pentagon, all about a half-hour's drive from here. So this area is home to a lot of current and former government workers, military service members. Also, there's a high concentration of African-American voters. So that demographic mix is one of the reasons why the Biden campaign hopes that it will really boost his campaign. Same thing for Michael Bloomberg. He spent a lot of time, a lot of money here, trying to convince voters in this region that he should be their candidate, Brian.
All right, Jeff, thank you. And to Josh Letterman we go, who is standing by with the campaign manager of the Bloomberg presidential campaign, Kevin Sheekey. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Brian, that's right. We are with campaign manager Kevin Sheekey here at the event where Mike Bloomberg will be speaking here in Florida, not at early Super Tuesday state, but one that comes up 2 weeks from now. Kevin, a lot has changed in just the last 72 hours or so, with the party seeming to coalesce behind Joe Biden. What do you guys have to do tonight to justify staying in this race past tomorrow?
Well, listen, we're finally into the real meat of the campaign. Before now, we've had 4 states which represented 3.9% of the vote. We're going to get the 8% of the vote tonight. There's going to be real delegates. Mike Bloomberg is the only can in the race who has campaigned in all 14 Super Tuesday states. I expect him to do well. I expect him to be above threshold in virtually all of those states, and we'll see where we end.
Do you think he'll get above 15% viability to get delegates in almost all of the states tonight?
Absolutely. All of them matter.
And that's what your internal polling shows as well?
That is what our polling shows.
So the party seems to be saying that they're with Joe Biden at this point. Mike Bloomberg said today he sees the path as a contested convention. What makes you think that if there was a contested convention, Democrats would want Mike Bloomberg as their nominee and not Joe Biden?
Well, let's not overstate the party. 2 candidates have endorsed Joe Biden. I have great respect for the former vice president. I happen to know him personally. But not the party. I'm a member of the party. There are lots of people here tonight who are members of the party. People who are members of the party are going to vote today. And we're going to find out how they vote in North Carolina and Virginia and Colorado and Texas and California. And so we'll see what the party says tonight.
But you must be worried, Mike Bloomberg must be worried that his legacy is at stake here and that he could be seen long-term as a spoiler for Democrats if this doesn't go his way and it ends up, handing this to President Trump.
Absolutely not. So let's talk about what Mike Bloomberg has done in the last cycle, and let's talk about what he's doing in this cycle. So in the last cycle, Mike Bloomberg decided that we desperately needed a Democratic House. And so he led campaigns in 24 Republican districts around the country. He elected 21 Democratic members of the House, newly elected Democratic members of the House. 18 of them were women. More than a few Republicans have said that Mike Bloomberg was responsible for Nancy Pelosi being Speaker and for impeachment, which subsequently came. And we wear that as a badge of honor. Let's talk about what he's going to do this cycle. Mike Bloomberg was committed to removing this president from office, and he was going to do it from the sidelines. And he decided, like a lot of other Americans did, that, hey, I don't want to be on the sidelines anymore. And I'll tell you one thing about Mike Bloomberg. He will either be the nominee for this party, or he will be the most important person to that nominee.
Kevin Sheekey, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Brian, you heard it right here. The Bloomberg campaign plowing forward, saying they do expect to be viable in almost every state tonight. We know that there are tough decisions that will lie ahead after the results come in, and we'll have to see how this goes tonight for Mike Bloomberg. Brian?
Josh Letterman, thanks so much. And we go into tonight with these 2 strange and sad backdrops. We have 9 Americans dead to coronavirus. We lost 25 souls last night in a natural disaster in Nashville, Tennessee.
In Tennessee, one of the states that is voting right now, I should tell you, we just got an update just from our decision desk, actually, within the past few minutes, which is that although Tennessee is listed as an 8 p.m. Eastern poll closing, we're not actually going to be releasing any results or any numbers at all from Tennessee until 1 hour after that, until 9 p.m. Eastern, because the polls have been pushed to stay open an extra hour in Davidson County, which is the county that was hit by those devastating and fatal tornadoes. So again, the Tennessee poll closing, they've gotten your notes that tells you it's 8 o'clock. You won't hear anything out of Tennessee for an additional hour because those polls will be open later.
Coming up on 17 minutes prior to our first call at the top of the hour, the Commonwealth of Virginia, a politically critical state. That and more when we come back. 15 minutes to go, and because things are already traveling fast and because we have these competing stories yet again, it was something Kevin Sheekey said at the end of his interview with Josh Letterman, the Bloomberg campaign manager. We wanted to hear out Nicole Wallace on this front.
So he's in response to Josh's question, last answer was Mike Bloomberg will either be the nominee or he will be the most important person in the country to the person who is the nominee.
Let me say something first, though, about Kevin Sheekey, because I've done interviews with you in that position on an election night when I wasn't sure how my candidate was going to do. It's a hard job to have, but if things don't go Bloomberg's way, if he does not meet threshold in every state tonight, and if the Bloomberg campaign ceases to exist at any point in the near future, that man will be the one who has the job of walking in and telling Mike Bloomberg, you know, it's time. So it's good on Josh Letterman to get some time with Kevin Sheekey. Kevin Sheekey's point is only true if the nominee is Joe Biden. I mean, Bloomberg has already said thanks, but no thanks. I don't want your money.
So it would work for any candidate other than Bernie Sanders. Sanders is the only one who said no.
I'll go with David Plouffe's analysis that there are only two people at this point who have a path to the nomination, and that's Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. So, I've had those jobs. You have to say those things, but the truth is, Mike Bloomberg only becomes the most important person to the nominee if the nominee is Joe Biden. I have to say something. I've talked to two folks from the Biden campaign, a couple of folks from the Bloomberg campaign. There's an analysis that the Biden campaign is letting seep into collective groupthink that is very dangerous to them. Bernie Sanders, and I watched his speech Saturday in Boston. I've watched a couple of his speeches since the Nevada caucuses. He has turned this idea of an establishment as he's weaponized it against Biden. The Democratic establishment did nothing for Joe Biden, and they would have left him as roadkill if he'd bombed on Saturday night. African-American voters, every age, male and female, of South Carolina and Jim Clyburn are the reason Joe Biden is hoping, and in the sources I talked to said, feeling really, really good and cautiously optimistic about the results tonight. One reason that they're feeling really, really good, it has nothing to do with the Democratic establishment. It's African-American voters in South Carolina.
But every headline and all political coverage all around the country is like the establishment is coalescing. The establishment.
Other prominent Democrats are coming after seeing Biden perform that well in South Carolina. Then other prominent Democrats said, okay, well, maybe Joe can do it, because there were doubts.
Well, let me tell you, with friends like that, you should stick to African-American voters.
Exactly. No, exactly.
These were not people saying very nice things. And these include people, former Obama folks. I mean, the idea that Bernie Sanders could weaponize the Democratic establishment against Joe Biden will be Joe Biden's fault.
Well, it's what he did against Hillary Clinton in 2016 as well.
But it's a lie. I mean, it's a lie. And Bernie is strong enough that I think listen, and I say this as a dispassionate former Republican who watched my party sort of implode around sort of fake truths and false grievances. The establishment had nothing to do with Joe Biden's victory. He's flat broke. He has not a single ad on the air. I mean, he's not advertising in any Super Tuesday states. Yeah. His victory is owed to African-American voters, male and female, of every age in South Carolina, full stop. Now, the momentum he has today, he can share credit for that with Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke gave a remarkable speech, and a few others. But the Democratic establishment had essentially turned their back on Joe Biden before Saturday night.
See how you do, Joe. One other thing, though, about that, be the most important person to the nominee, to Joe Biden, if he is the nominee. I think Mike Bloomberg really would be the most important person, and not just because of the checks he could write to what is Super PAC or whatever supporting Biden, but because of the organization that Bloomberg has put together across the country,
no doubt.
that's paid through November.
Yeah.
That has done the sort of micro-targeting and mailings, and they're a lot more in touch with the
Olympic trolling of this president already.
Exactly.
Yes. Oh, and the ads paid and digital.
The likes of which you don't see.
I mean, but they're out on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media. I mean, they're doing it the modern way, the way you have to run a campaign, as opposed to the Democratic Party.
You could see Mike Bloomberg running the anti-Trump campaign while Joe Biden ran the Joe Biden for President campaign, and they could essentially be separate organizations.
Well, they would have to be, yeah.
Well, technically they'd have to be organizations, but they'd be separate projects, side by side.
A lot of our coverage late in the night will be about the big prize to the far west. California is home to 40 million Americans. It's also home to our own Katie Tur. She is tracking the vote at Evergreen Rec Center in East LA. Hey, Katie.
Hey there, Brian. 415 delegates in this state alone. Not so great voting here right now. This is a line, about 30, 40 people, 50 total in this gym. And just here is a 2 to 3 hour line right now. Voters have said they're extraordinarily frustrated. That's because there are only 5 voting booths in this room, and 2 of them are down. One of them jammed a little bit earlier today in a paper jam. Another has been down for 4 days. So there's a lot of frustration here, especially in this community, which is a diverse community, both in age and in demographics. A lot of Latinos out here, some who don't speak English, might have a harder time with some of these new machines. An older population that also might have a harder time with some of these new machines. The Latino population is going to be oh so important in this state. It's the largest voting bloc in the state. And if they come out in force, they could be the ones to determine who wins. Bernie Sanders has been making real inroads within the Latino community, and not just for this election, but there's holdovers from 2016. People and organization and leadership that's been here this entire time, maintaining a relationship with this community. Going into, if you go into a Bernie Sanders headquarters, what they'll give you is, they won't say, you know, buy this T-shirt. They won't say we need to find someone who speaks Spanish. They'll have a Spanish speaker there, oftentimes a community leader that everybody knows, and they will send you out with pamphlets, with posters of AOC, and they'll ask you to basically eulogize within your community. They're hoping that that pays off in this election. There's a bit of a generational split, Brian, between the under 45 voters who are expected to like Bernie Sanders a little bit more and the older voters who like Biden, but rules are made to be broken. I talked to a young guy that left here a moment ago. He said he voted for Joe Biden, and I talked to an elderly couple who left right after him, and they both said they were voting for Bernie Sanders.
All right, Katie Tur, East LA. We say it all the time. We have no federal elections, really. We have no state elections, really. Elections are local matters, and your ability to vote is only as good as your local precinct's ability to receive and record your vote. We're going to take a break. When we come back, in just the next segment, we will have the first poll closing of the night. There you see it, coming up in 6.5 minutes. Coming up on 3 minutes to go until our first 2 states, our first 2 poll closings of the night.
I'm having a good time. I'm sorry.
That's what you want, really. That's really what you want.
Very exciting. We're 3 minutes away from Vermont and Virginia.
All right. David Plouffe, you engineered a huge victory once. These 2 states that share a first letter could not be more dissimilar for states that are driving distance between them.
Right. We won them both in 08, which is very nice. But what I'd say is obviously Bernie's home state, small state, it's going to net delegates. But Virginia is really important. It's become, it was a battleground state. Now it's probably lean blue. But, you know, you've got a lot of suburban voters, heavy African-American population, growing Latino population. So I think what we see in Virginia is likely to have echoes of what we see to its southern neighbor, North Carolina, and maybe over in Tennessee once that closes. So I think we are going to learn a lot about what at least the eastern part of the calendar may look like tonight based on what we see in Virginia. I will say one thing, Brian. You showed the lines. We saw them in Texas, a state that's run by Republicans. California, Los Angeles, we own as Democrats the local government and the state government. This is not complicated. How many people do you expect to vote? How many poll workers do you need? What kind of equipment do you need? There's just no excuse where we control the levers of government to have those kind of lines.
Here. Democrats have complained at Republican efforts to constrict voting rights for years and years. To David Plouffe's point, this is home field advantage for that party in that state.
And California has taken a number of steps legislatively to make it easier to vote. I mean, you can turn up as an unregistered voter in California, register on election day, and vote that day. You can also, in 14 counties in California, they mail every single voter a ballot. And you can hold on to that ballot, bring it in person, or you can mail it without a stamp on Election Day. So they make it as easy as possible. They've got to be able to follow through. They've got to make it so that when you do show up and you do get in line, your country isn't asking for heroic sacrifice from you in order to cast your vote.
You were able to vote in California at the same time Iowans were caucusing.
Yeah.
And it's going to be said, depending on how much early vote is locked in, that was too long an early vote period.
Well, I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit later on as we get close to California closing time,
and I don't mean to make you the spokesperson for your home state.
No, it's all right. I kind of enjoy it, actually. But California is very, very important tonight. It's going to be very, very important in terms of the total number of delegates. There's also zero chance that we're going to have actual complete results out of California
Thank you for saying that.
It's really not going to happen.
Truth
They're not
in
even going to
advertising.
try to get us those results tonight because of the way they cast votes and tally them in that state.
Truth in advertising. It needed to be said. No matter how late you stay up with us, it is highly unlikely we're going to have a final take it to the bank lock cinch result. Here's our big board. Let's count down together what we're calling an election alert. 5 seconds now until the top of the hour. Our first two poll closings of the night this Super Tuesday, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, and the night, it turns out, begins with very good news for Joe Biden. Good news for Joe Biden indeed. The Commonwealth of Virginia, he is at this hour at poll closing, the projected winner. On up north to the state of Vermont, as we were saying, not a big shocker here. The hometown, home state Senator Bernie Sanders, the projected winner, 8 delegates awarded out of 16. This is the delegate tally you'll be seeing for just tonight. The number on the far right is what's important. 1,300 and change at stake. Two big ones to start off.
Yes, and it'll be interesting to see. I mean, even though there is no suspense about the Vermont results, I think in 2016 it was Senator Sanders in Vermont 86-14.
Okay, so
over Hillary Clinton.
I don't know what you're saying.
But it'll be interesting to see if he holds everybody to single digits, certainly if he holds everybody else to below the 15% viability. And in Virginia, to get a poll closing call in Virginia, I do think that it's not a shock that Joe Biden has won in Virginia. I personally am surprised that he's won by a significant enough and clear enough margin that we're able to call it at poll closing. That has to be a source of great cheer for the Biden campaign tonight. And this is a state where Bloomberg and Sanders both were contesting this state.
And they were worried about some of the, people that live and work in D.C., young Democratic voters who are very active, who are very policy savvy, being very excited about and attracted to Sanders and Warren. I think they are very heartened by this win and this call.
Steve, now that we can discuss what we know and what we knew before polls closing, what kind of a night does this indicate to you?
This call in Virginia with no returns in, just based on the exit poll, that has echoes of what happened on Saturday in South Carolina. This is a huge development to start the night. Let me show you a couple of reasons why. One of the reasons why you're seeing this call right now, it is the breakdown. We talk about black voters in Virginia, more than a quarter of the electorate there. Take a look at what we're seeing here tonight. Look at this in the exit poll. 66% for Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders sitting back at 17%. This is a carbon copy of what we saw over the weekend in South Carolina. There was some talk, perhaps some hopeful talk from Sanders supporters that the South Carolina result might have been a product of Jim Clyburn, in particular personal appeal he might have had in that state. But we are seeing what happened there among black voters replicated here in Virginia. Moreover, for Sanders, in 2016, against Hillary Clinton in the state of Virginia, he got walloped. He got walloped among black voters. He got 16% then among black voters. Tonight, he is running at 17%. That tells you, and I'm trying to see if we have the white vote here. Also among white voters, we don't have it up on the screen, but I can tell you among white voters in Virginia, the exit poll is pointing to a double-digit victory, or a double-digit lead, I should say, for Joe Biden. What does that mean? Again, I said the nature of this delegate hunt changed in the last couple of days. Let me show you what this means. Right now, on the basis of Virginia and that lead in the exit poll, that very overwhelming lead in the exit poll, the decision desk here is confident that Biden will receive at least 16 at-large delegates in the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that, even with Sanders collecting 8 in Vermont, our decision desk is also right now projecting that, puts Joe Biden in first place in the delegate race. But this is 16. There are 99 at stake in Virginia. And with the kind of margin you are seeing Joe Biden get in this exit poll, the opportunity now for him is to gobble up like this is not even an official estimate, but the opportunity is here tonight for Biden to gobble up 25, 30 to net 25, 30, or 35 delegates out of the state over Bernie Sanders just a week ago. When you were looking at the only available poll data from Virginia, you had Sanders getting several more delegates in this state than Joe Biden. You had Michael Bloomberg getting about the same number. What you have tonight, according to the exit poll, it looks like Bloomberg struggling to hit that viability number. We will see if he hits that 15%, but an overwhelming lead here for Joe Biden that is likely to translate into an overwhelming delegate advantage already. Just on the exit poll, he takes the lead from Virginia. You can expect that number to go up significantly. And yes, as David Plouffe said, given what we saw in South Carolina, given what we are seeing in in Virginia, that seems to portend something for these other states. Certainly a pattern may be establishing here.
With the proviso that we may go live to Los Angeles when we see Joe Biden, who is apparently ready to walk into a given location. Eugene, tonight may prove that Congressman Clyburn's words and his emotion and his value to the party are going to echo from the Piedmont to the Tidewater to the Smoky Mountains to Hatteras.
It may. I mean, he gave the push. African-American voters in South Carolina responded overwhelmingly. That is resonating apparently in Virginia and perhaps beyond. And, you know, it's hard to just remember back just like a couple of weeks. It was not at all clear that Jim Clyburn was going to endorse.
Yeah.
It was doubtful that he would endorse Bernie Sanders, but there was a lot of hesitation there. There seemed to be a lot of hesitation about endorsing his old friend and longtime colleague, Joe Biden, and that was because Biden seemed so shaky on the campaign trail, and there was just not a lot of confidence. That's what the establishment was thinking.
The establishment hadn't gotten behind him.
And then Biden did better, and Clyburn, I think, saw a very stark choice, and he is, he's majority whip. He wants to keep that majority in the House. He worries about every one of those, red district / blue district Democrats who won in the last cycle. And he saw the prospect of Bernie Sanders leading the ticket. And I think he decided that he had to act. And timing is everything. I mean, the moment he did it, the way he did it, the emotion that he put behind it, and there were a lot of voters in South Carolina who were sort of waiting for that sort of signal, that sort of sign. What do we do?
But he also, on that day, on the night of the win, he didn't rest on his laurels. He gave that campaign some tough love that a lot of people in the Democratic establishment thought they badly needed. He said, turn up your fundraising, turn up your campaign. And that campaign, to that campaign's credit and to the candidate's credit, racked up 3 big endorsements. I mean, that we all sat here Saturday night saying, what are they going to do with this win? It's too late to buy ads. I mean, we all sat here, nattering nabobs of negativity. And then look what that campaign did. And I think there's a direct line between Jim Clyburn's, the power of his endorsement, what he did. I mean, candidates are so psychologically impacted by momentum in both directions. Clyburn's sort of emotional, heartfelt words, he said, my late wife and I, Joe is our friend. He is a good man. And it let Joe Biden run in South Carolina as his own version of his best self. He being called and being seen as a good man who suffered a lot and gotten off the mat was the theme he carried through that race, and it was the theme of his campaign speech, his victory speech Saturday night.
Whatever the opposite of a lukewarm endorsement is, that was what we saw. Steve Kornacki, I'm told, has new numbers at the board.
We have 2 new numbers we can show you again. Just building on the story we were telling you in Virginia a minute ago, we said early on in this, when Sanders looked like he might be running away with things a week or 2 ago, one of the questions with him was, could he expand his support among older voters? That age divide has been so pronounced. Let's take a look here. 45 and older in Virginia. This is a majority of the electorate in Virginia. What are you seeing here? The answer, it's a resounding no. The answer to that question about Sanders expanding his support, I mean, this is what we were seeing before Nevada. This is what we were seeing in 2016. There just continues to be a pronounced age divide. He's barely running ahead of Bloomberg here. He's more than 40 points behind Joe Biden. So again, that is something we looked at when Sanders won Nevada, and we said, is there going to be a bandwagon effect here that rolls him all the way to the nomination? You would expect to see this number coming up significantly. There is still resistance from a major chunk of the electorate. One other thing, I showed you the black vote in Virginia. We said, does that portend something across other states tonight? I can also show you across the South. If you look at the states that are up tonight in the South, collectively, put the exit polls together, this is what the black vote is looking like at this hour. Same thing. Joe Biden, 2/3, 66%. Bernie Sanders, 50 points behind, 66 to 16. This is the same thing that bedeviled Bernie Sanders against Hillary Clinton in 2016. Inability to build black support, costing him in states with significant black populations. And again, we saw it in South Carolina. We see it in Virginia. That's why you've got the call. And it looks like we are seeing this across the South tonight.
Let's go to L.A. Mike Memoli. Mike, start with describing where you are and what we're waiting for.
Well, Brian, we're in Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles. The vice president, as I mentioned before, has already stopped for ice cream. And so now after dessert, he's going to come for dinner or breakfast, I guess. But
He's
we're
hitting all the major food groups, and they have an A for cleanliness in the window, so you've chosen well.
That's exactly right. I left my position behind the cash register. We're going to hopefully be able to inform the vice president as he walks in of what we just announced, which is, as you note, a poll closing call in Virginia.
There he is.
And for all the reasons that you outlined. And you have a better vantage point on him than I do.
It'll be the next guy right after. We got a couple more guests. Hang on.
It could have been a doppelganger.
It's true, but I thought I saw him crossing the street in the background.
Good to see you. I'm just the welcoming committee here, guys. I was... But no, for all the reasons you stated, I mean, this is an important indication of where things are heading tonight for Joe Biden. The campaigns... In more difficult times, they viewed South Carolina as their firewall, that the place he absolutely needed to win in order to keep himself viable. But as things were recovering for the former vice president, they viewed it as a potential springboard, a launching pad for his candidacy, especially if it could demonstrate the kind of support among African-American voters that they have said all along is the only formula that you have for success as a Democratic candidate for president. And so when you see an early result in Virginia, they're counting on similar results in other places in the Deep South, including Alabama, Tennessee, and increasingly a place like Texas, which emerged as an important part of their Super Tuesday strategy, a place where he spent yesterday, not just in Houston, but of course in Dallas with the endorsements from Pete Buttigieg, from Beto O'Rourke, and from Amy Klobuchar. And the other interesting point, of course, is, you know, of the 1,300 delegates or more that are at stake tonight, more than 800 of those delegates are not awarded based on statewide results, but on the basis of individual congressional district results. And the Biden campaign, since the very beginning, has had a ranking of those districts. They're not all created equal. The more African-American, the more gerrymandered in some cases the district, the more delegates that are awarded. And that's why you see Joe Biden spending part of his morning in Oakland, California, which has the most delegates of any of the California districts at play tonight, and ending here in Los Angeles. There might be some votes, I suppose, still at stake here. And so they're, with limited resources that not all the other candidates had, less than the other candidates had, the Biden campaign poured all those money and resources into those heavily African-American districts to try to pick off delegate advantages. And we'll see if we can ask the vice president about it any second now.
All right, Mike, try the chicken and waffles. It's the best in the city. Let us know when we need to come back to you. The whole control room is watching that restaurant. Let's go to Shaq Brewster in Vermont, where, let's not forget, they're celebrating the victory of their home state in the Sanders camp. Shaq, what's it like there?
That's right. Vermont was not a state that Senator Sanders was necessarily worried about, but you can tell from his supporters they were excited to celebrate when that call came in on the screen, and they cheered. There was a chance of Bernie, Bernie. And then when Vice President Biden, when that call came in for Vice President Biden, there were boos that started among the crowd. So you're getting that ebb and flow of what the audience and what his supporters have to say. I'm told that Senator Sanders is not here in the building right now. He's home with family watching the results, but these results as they come in, he's watching them closely, and his campaign is still saying they're feeling good. Remember, at the end of the day, they want to come out of Super Tuesday with the delegate lead. As they're watching Virginia, I'm still waiting for a response of what they have to say and what they're seeing from Virginia. But as they see these results come in, they want the delegate lead, so they continue to watch closely. Brian?
Shaq, thank you.
Shaq, let me just clarify with you. When they announced the Virginia results, that Virginia was being called for Joe Biden, the Sanders crowd booed at those results?
They did. It went from a loud cheer when Vermont, which came up first, it wasn't on NBC. They're not watching us, unfortunately. But when the first call came in with Vermont, there was a loud cheer. There was those big chants of Bernie, Bernie, and then it switched to the second projection from Virginia, and that's when you heard the loud boos go across. And then it showed an image of the crowd here, and that's when the crowd completely erupted. The thing about this this setting, this is a typical rally, I'm told. This is not going to be a regular election night speech that you'll hear from Senator Sanders. There's a band here. Fish is going to perform. There's actually two separate stages. There's one stage behind me and another stage over there where the band is going to perform. So this crowd is ready to celebrate.
Shaquille Brewster, thank you very much. Fascinating stuff.
Wow.
I don't know if there are other campaigns right now where they boo at the mention of the other candidates and the other. I mean,
although Bernie was booed at the last debate, and that was a first.
Oh, from the debate
from the crowd.
That was weird.
But just the presence of boos at this portion of the campaign, to your point.
That was strange. I mean, every debate is different, but it was a very volatile crowd making themselves known at that last debate. But in terms of election parties, I'm not used to seeing the crowd boo at the mention of, especially a candidate of the same party. You don't. That's
it's not a good look. Look, I mean, and it doesn't project a lot of confidence. I think their candidate is still in a very strong position, and this is sort of what I was alluding to before. I think if we look back and the Nevada caucuses end up being sort of the high water mark for momentum and possibility in terms of growing Bernie's reach and appeal, that'll be a sad thing for supporters, but it will not perhaps be disconnected from some of the questions about the conduct. I mean, there are a lot of questions among Democratic activists, and I can sort of report on this. I'm not as exposed to this, but I know a lot of Democratic activists are exposed to a lot of passion, and I think you have to chalk it up to passion. Let's not impugn the motive. I mean, the passion for Bernie doesn't allow any space to consider anybody else.
No, but the passion is genuine and it's there, but it can be pretty tough. Intense. You know, it can be really intense. You know, it's interesting. So last week, you know, a few days ago, we were saying, does Joe Biden have a firewall in South Carolina? Tonight, before the evening is over, we might be asking if Bernie Sanders has a firewall in California. If he has.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. That's why all the Pulitzers make sense.
Steve Kornacki, we think Eugene should have a column for some of this. That was a heck of a quote from our friend Gene. But in addition to numbers that I see are filling up your board, can you start with an answer to this question? Explain to the good folks watching how cautious our election unit is, how highly unusual it was for us to make a poll close projection for Joe Biden in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, I mean, they are extremely cautious. Pardon me, they did it last Saturday as well. Actually, this is two straight, I guess. But before that, if you can remember a couple weeks ago, I know it feels like ancient history, the night of the Nevada caucuses, we had an exit poll that came in that night that showed Bernie Sanders far ahead of the field, not quite as far ahead as Joe Biden is in the exit poll here in Virginia. So as a result, back then, even though we looked at that exit poll in Nevada, and I would have, gun to my head, bet my life that Bernie Sanders was going to win based on that exit poll, they waited then to get some precincts in. So this has crossed an extra threshold for our decision desk to be calling it. We are getting some actual results, and it's just a scattering right here. But again, the Biden leading overwhelmingly here. And one thing I want to draw your attention to, you see the state called for Biden. That means, given what our decision desk is doing, this is likely to be a very big win for Joe Biden in Virginia. It then raises the question, since we are in a delegate race right now, and there are 99 pledged delegates up for grabs in Virginia, when you're in a delegate race and you're winning a state big, you don't want a lot of candidates hitting the 15% threshold. So as these returns come in tonight, it is even better news for Joe Biden if nobody else, and that means Bloomberg and Warren, get above 15. If it's just Biden and it's just Sanders and it is a Biden landslide, then Biden is going to net from this state something on the order of 30 delegates, meaning he'll probably get like 65. Sanders would get 34. It'd be some split like that. Be a huge delegate haul. Those are tough to get in these states. You get an opportunity for that. Look, again, it just changed here to 57-23. So he wants Bloomberg, Biden does. He wants Bloomberg and Warren to stay somewhere close to where they are. Looking at our exit poll, looking at some of the splits right now, it's very much possible that that's going to happen for Joe Biden.
Out to the house of chicken and waffles we go. Joe Biden is entering the restaurant, I'm told, in Los Angeles. Mike Memoli, our man there.
They have a false alarm earlier, and I think it's less of a false alarm now. This is the kind of thing that happens covering the Biden campaign, but he's on his way in. I've moved my position just a bit off to the side to be a good team player here with my friends and the rest of the press forum.
No, okay. All right. I felt like we were peeping out of your neckline.
While we're waiting for the former vice president to come in, I think what we're seeing tonight is indicative of what has been, I think, a shift in some of the strategy from the Biden campaign over the last, few weeks. What was a strategy built around crowd events that weren't necessarily the most highly attended crowd events in the Iowa and New Hampshire phase of this campaign. I think they recognize that the Biden that Democratic voters have come to love over the years is the one that we're about to see here, the one who's in their face, who's come shaking hands, glad-handing. And so we've seen less over the last few weeks of the kind of traditional rallies that a Bernie Sanders does that have 10,000 people or more in attendance, and more just a focus on Joe Biden, the man, giving him opportunities to take selfies, to do the kind of retail that his campaign insists that he does better than anybody. And we're finally at the point where he's inching his way closer to the door.
Hey, Mike, while we're waiting for the vice president to approach the door, can I ask you about one thing you mentioned earlier, which is that you said Vice President Biden took a swing through Oakland, California today. I think that raised a lot of questions about whether or not he might be seeking to get an endorsement from or otherwise try to cultivate support from Kamala Harris, who's announced her campaign in Oakland, California, and who's from Alameda County. Any truth to that speculation, or was that just a random coincidence?
Well, that was, speaking of false alarms, certainly a false alarm there. I think given what we saw yesterday with this unbelievable and well-executed rollout of the former candidate endorsements in Texas yesterday, people saw Oakland on the schedule. I can assure you it was something that had been, in fact, on the schedule for some time. We know that Senator Harris had been in Washington voting, and so when we saw an initial report come across indicating that an endorsement might be happening there, we were suspicious. I can say this, when I interviewed the vice president yesterday and I asked him about whether he's speaking to some of these other former candidates trying to court their endorsements, he said things are moving very fast. And one thing we know from other reporting about Senator Harris specifically is that she was interested in endorsing. She and Biden do have a relationship that goes back, especially her friendship with Beau, the former vice president's late son, when they both served as attorneys general together. I know that that's an endorsement he certainly would love to have, and I know from my time on the campaign trail that that's a potential ticket that a lot of voters would love to see. But the timing is everything, and perhaps Senator Harris is interested in waiting for another moment to throw her support behind the vice president, if that is, in fact, who she wants to throw her support behind at all.
It has been interesting to watch the heavyweights in California Democratic politics make their decision. The wife of California Governor Gavin Newsom endorsing Elizabeth Warren, former U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer endorsing Joe Biden, L.A. Mayor Eric Garcetti endorsing Vice President Biden, Mayor Bloomberg getting an endorsement from London Breed, who is the relatively recently elected mayor of San Francisco. So as a native Californian, I can tell you, California, Nicole, you are as well, Californians are not used to mattering in presidential politics, either in the primary, in either party, or in the general. And so to see California power brokers get courted for something other than California-specific politics and money, and exactly, it is it's something new and something that is sort of fresh to, I think, the structure in California.
And the idea that Biden is going to be before the California voters without a dollar spent on, I mean, governors have to raise presidential campaign-size amounts of money to run for governor statewide in California because the media is so expensive.
Here we go. We may actually see him come through the doorway.
Mr. Vice President, NBC projected that you're the winner in Virginia. What do you make of that call, especially coming so early?
Hey, buddy. This poor guy wants to hide. It feels good. I don't know what the outcome, what the actual results are, but it feels good, and we're feeling optimistic. I think we're going to do well in some other states as well.
How do you define success for you tonight?
I told you, I'm not the pundit. You guys will define that.
All right, well, we will do...
Welcome, everybody. The reason why we're here today is because a few years ago, we came here with President Obama, so it's the historical significance of coming here today with Vice President.
Okay. Hey, team, how are you back there? We're really messing things up for you, aren't we?
We're also here with our mayor, Mayor Garcetti. Mike Gibson.
All right, Mike. How are you? Diane Watson's over there.
Mike Gibson.
All right, Mike. How are you? Diane Watson's over
See Vice President Biden working the crowd there. L.A. Mayor Eric Garcetti is with him. I believe that's Congresswoman Karen Bassel, but she hasn't turned around to face the cameras. I believe that's who that is. Vice President Biden very excited about his win in Virginia. Let's go to Elizabeth Warren, who's in Michigan right now. She's addressing supporters.
Cast a vote from your heart and vote for the person you think will make the best president of the United States of America. Because I want you to think for a minute about this democracy. You are the ones who get to pick the person who will be the next president, and it is an awesome thing. You are going to do it right here in Michigan next week. People are doing it in California right now, and that's what it means to have a democracy. I'm in this race because I believe I will make the best president of the United States. Tell you why. I was not born a politician, but I was born a fighter. And I want you to know this. Is this on? Good. I want you to know this. I gotta have a loud voice here. I come by this honest. I think that maybe the reason I fought all my life is because I learned this from my mother. I want to tell you a story about me. I grew up in Oklahoma. Okay, we got a few Okies here. I grew up in Oklahoma. I am the baby. I have 3 much older brothers. They all went off and joined the military. I am what used to be called a late in life baby. My mother always just called me the surprise. Yep, my 3 brothers are all retired. They're back in Oklahoma now. To this day, they are referred to as the boys. That's to distinguish them from the surprise. Now, when I was in middle school, all 3 of the boys were gone by then, and it was just my mom and my daddy and me. And my daddy had a heart attack. He pulled through, but he couldn't work for a long, long time. And I still remember the day when we lost the family station wagon. I remember how my mother used to tuck me in at night, and she would always kiss me and give me this big smile, and I knew what was coming next. She'd leave my room, close the door, and then I'd hear her start to cry. She never wanted to cry in front of me, and I knew that. This is when I learned words like mortgage and foreclosure. And one day, I walked into my folks' bedroom, and laid out on the bed was the dress. Now, some of you in this room will know the dress. It's the one that only comes out for weddings, funerals, and graduations. And there, down by the foot of the bed, was my mother. And she had on her slip, and she was in her stocking feet, and she was pacing
for the crowd from Elizabeth Warren, and we hesitate to interrupt, but we are approaching the bottom of the hour. That means poll closing in North Carolina. Robert Gibbs, former press secretary in the Obama White House, has joined our conversation. Robert, thus far, the night thus far, your assessment of it especially for Joe Biden, but to a lesser extent Bernie Sanders, given the results so far?
Well, look, I think the night has gone kind of as we have expected post-South Carolina. Pretty remarkable to see the movement in Virginia, probably a toss-up state 5 days ago, and a place that it looks like the vice president is going to do very well in. Obviously, Vermont is going to go pretty strong for Bernie. I think it'll be interesting to watch the night as you see waves of real estate going to different folks, right? That arc of the North that will be the Maine, the Minnesotas, over into the Colorados, where Bernie will do better. That southeastern swing where the vice president will do better. And then, obviously, the big prizes of the night. Where does Texas and where does California end up? I think will be fascinating to watch.
40 seconds coming up to North Carolina. Again, one of the more fascinating electorates, especially as the Biden campaign had to look at it and target it.
And a hard-fought state. I mean, North Carolina is a battleground like you can't believe. And Berg spent a ton of money there, more than $12 million. Sanders spent almost $2 million there. Biden hasn't spent much anywhere, but what he has spent in places like North Carolina.
The music heralds what's coming up, as you can see, reading along with us as we approach 7:30 Eastern Time and the closing of the polls in the state of North Carolina. At 0-0, we have 7:30, and it turns out a big night for Joe Biden just got bigger. We are making a poll closing projection that Joe Biden will win the North Carolina primary. This is on top of Joe Biden's projected victory in the Commonwealth of Virginia. This is on top of Bernie Sanders' projected victory in his home state of Vermont. Here is how we lay out, looking at the delegates awarded thus far tonight. And here is how we lay out, looking at the delegates thus far this season in all. Remember, we have some big real estate coming tonight. It's not called Super Tuesday for nothing. Steve Kornacki at the big board. And Steve, I have to repeat my question. Remind the folks how consequential it is to call the state of North Carolina as a projection, 7:30 Eastern Time closing.
Yeah, we say they're rare. They're getting pretty common all of a sudden. And what you're seeing here, some demographic characteristics very similar here in North Carolina to what we had in Virginia. 27%, just over a quarter of the electorate in North Carolina, African-American. Take a look at how the black vote is breaking down. Again, Joe Biden over 60%. Sanders still stuck on that number of just 16%. Overwhelming support from a quarter of the electorate there for Joe Biden. This pattern is now South Carolina, Virginia, North Carolina. We are seeing it everywhere. When you look at white voters, by the way, in North Carolina, here's what you're seeing. Again, Biden's winning there, too. It's a double-digit margin. It's not as much as the black voter margin, but it's a double-digit margin. That adds up to a landslide. That adds up to a landslide in North Carolina for Joe Biden, a landslide for Joe Biden in Virginia. And it's telling us a couple of things. First of all, the results we're getting from these early states are telling us that the idea that there was broad momentum for Joe Biden coming out of South Carolina, that is now being backed up by what we're seeing in these results. Why do I say that? Because on Saturday night, as Joe Biden was winning South Carolina overwhelmingly, we got a poll out of Virginia, and it put Bernie Sanders ahead by 2 points. That's how much movement, how quickly and how much you've had movement in states like Virginia and North Carolina. It tells you that the question I posed at the beginning of the night, was this going to be about Bernie Sanders and how big his delegate lead was going to be? Or was tonight's story going to be about whether Bernie Sanders was going to emerge tonight with a delegate lead? The results we are seeing in Virginia and North Carolina tonight are suggesting that that second storyline is the one we maybe need to start following here.
Thank you, Steve.
Kornacki, can I just ask you one follow-up question that is about the age of voters that are turning out? Obviously, Senator Sanders, his theory of the case is that while he may lose moderate and swing voters, he will more than make up for it by turning out first-time voters and young voters. Do we have any meaningful data yet in terms of figuring out whether or not the proportion of the electorate in these states is tilting young or old or neither?
Yeah, I'm just looking at North Carolina right now in our exit poll. Under 30 years old, 13%. And the breakdown there is 54 to 21. Here's one I can show you. the under 45, over 45 divide in North Carolina. Take a look here, under 45. By the way, Sanders winning this, double digits, 42-31. This is not the margin his campaign has been hoping on in states. Give you a comparison, in Nevada, remember the night in Nevada when Bernie Sanders was winning big and we were talking about maybe there's a bandwagon effect? This same group of voters in Nevada was 56 Sanders and 8 Biden, the youngest voters. Tonight, 31 Biden, nearly a third of the younger electorate here, under 45 with Biden, and Sanders dropping from 56 to 42. And then if you take a look here at over 45, just to show you, Biden 50, and Sanders behind Bloomberg. No inroads for Sanders with older voters. Biden in states like North Carolina and Virginia making some inroads with younger voters.
Wow, Bloomberg outpacing Sanders with voters age 45 and over.
In North Carolina.
In North Carolina. Fascinating. Steve Kornacki, let's bring into the conversation now a man who has been the man of the hour, and uncomfortably so, for months now. He is the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, one of the hardest jobs in politics. Mr. Tom Perez, thank you for joining us tonight, sir. It's good to have you here.
Pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you.
Let me ask you about your dueling frontrunners tonight. We've got 5 candidates left in the race: Tulsi Gabbard, Mike Bloomberg, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden. We've seen Joe Biden do very well tonight, get poll closing calls in North Carolina and Virginia. As the former vice president continues to project this incredible strength in southern states, what does that mean to the overall Democratic strategy for the general election when we think about the Democratic Party's ability to compete in states like that?
Well, one thing, Rachel, that I'm most proud of in the 3+ years I've been on the job is that we've become a 50-state party again. One of the first elections we invested in was Doug Jones in Alabama. We invested in 2018 in Georgia. We have an initiative called Organizing Corps, where we're putting 1,200 organizers in 8 battleground states to hand over to the nominee. Those states include North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, and Arizona. We're organizing everywhere, and I think Democrats can win everywhere. And, you know, when you ignore the South, you are really slapping African-American voters in the face, and we shouldn't do that. That's the backbone of our party. And so we're absolutely competing there. We've got 2 Senate races in Georgia, and we're going to compete heavily down there.
Mr. Chairman, there's been a lot of drama within the field over the last 72 hours since South Carolina, seeing 3 of your candidates drop out, seeing 2 of them endorse Vice President Biden in dramatic fashion. Is the Democratic Party formally, the DNC, are you playing any role in those kinds of backroom negotiations, those kinds of discussions among candidates and formal candidates about who stays in the race, who gets out, and who endorses who?
No, those are up to the candidates themselves, and we leave that to the candidates, and they know when it's time to end their campaigns, and I trust them to do that. And what you saw from the decisions of candidates over the last few days, they understand that it's not about any one candidate. It's about making sure Democrats can win. And I respect their judgment. I respect the judgment of those who are still in the race. Tonight is young. We've got 2 or 3 states that have reported, or at least that you've projected. We got 11 to go. And again, this is all about math. It's about 1,991. So a lot more to go.
One of the things that's happened on your chairmanship is that a lot of states that used to run caucuses have been talked out of it. Obviously, we've still got Iowa and Nevada who had their caucuses this year. But just tonight, Maine, Colorado, Minnesota, Utah, I might have even missed one, are all states that previously had caucuses that tonight are going to be holding primaries instead. You have signaled in the past that you're happy with that you'd rather have these states doing primaries. That still hold tonight? Do you have any regrets on that, on that movement?
No. Well, Rachel, I think the 4 happiest people in America tonight are the 4 party chairs in those states that you just mentioned, who now don't have to run their own caucus. And the reason that I prefer primaries over caucuses is more people participate. Look at the record turnout in New Hampshire. We busted through the turnout of 08 in Obama. Look at South Carolina. People said you'd never eclipse Barack Obama in 2008, and we did. And we had 14 caucus states 4 years ago. We had 7 this time. And we're going to have a conversation after the season is over. We can't require states to move because it requires an act of the legislature. And there's some Republican governors who won't pay for a taxpayer for an actual primary. But we're certainly going to continue this conversation because I certainly prefer primaries to caucuses. More people participate. That's the bottom line. We got great energy. Let's make it as easy as possible for eligible people to vote.
Democratic Party Chairman Tom Perez, sir, I know it's going to be a long, long night for you as well as for us. Thanks for being with us tonight. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to talk to two of our friends in this segment. Leanne Caldwell first at the Cameron Village Regional Library in a great place, downtown Raleigh, North Carolina. Leanne, I know you talked to a ton of voters. We're able to see you, for starters, while you can't see us. And what were voters saying as they went to the polls in North Carolina today?
Well, Brian, what voters were saying is exactly what the results are showing, that things were splitting overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. This morning, we were at a precinct in Durham, North Carolina, which is predominantly African-American, and we heard so many people talking about their support for Joe Biden. And now we're in an affluent district in Raleigh, and same thing. A lot of people said that they were supporting Joe Biden because of his momentum coming from South Carolina, and also the number of endorsements he's gotten over the past few days has given them the confidence to vote for him today, thinking that he is perhaps the best person to beat Donald Trump in November. And this precinct, it had great turnout, Brian. They say that it's up to 50%, which is really high for a Democratic primary. So they're also Democrats are pointing to voter enthusiasm as well. We're just seeing the last voters just exit now because things are going to close down real soon here, Brian.
Leanne Caldwell, thank you. Covering one of the big stories of the night, an impressive victory at poll closing as projected by our network for Joe Biden in North Carolina. Steve Kornacki, they tell me you're getting more of a delegate count?
We're starting to get more of a delegate count. Let me show you first also some results here from Virginia coming in. Nearly a quarter of the state is now in. I mean, look at this. Joe Biden is leading here by 30 points. Does it remind you of South Carolina and all? This is a huge margin we're seeing. And look where it's coming from. You're seeing suburbs outside Richmond here, Chesterfield County, most of the vote in there. Look at that. Joe Biden up 33 points. Let's go to Henrico. North of it, again, more than half the vote. Biden running at 60%. What's still to come in Virginia? The biggest of them all, Fairfax County, just outside D.C. This is epicenter of sort of the blue wave voters we talked about in 2018. You would expect this, based on everything we're seeing, to be huge for Biden. In other words, when you see Biden up 54-23, you can expect a very big delegate haul. What are we looking at right now? This is where the current delegate race stands. Biden has been allocated 16 delegates from Virginia so far. He was just allocated 34 from Virginia, I should say. 34 of the state's 99. He's been allocated 16 so far in North Carolina. Of that state's 110. It puts him, you can see, 33 up in our running count. But again, what you're seeing here, there are a lot still to be allocated. If anything like this holds, you're looking at a scenario where Biden can get like 70, 65, 70 of the 99 delegates here out of Virginia. That would leave Sanders, obviously, with far fewer. It gives Biden an opportunity here, if this is replicated through the South, if he can run close to Sanders, even in Minnesota, it sets up a scenario where we could get all the way out to California tonight, and Biden might be running ahead in the delegate count when we get to California. You went to Vegas with that proposition a week ago. You could have got 40-1 odds.
And all of our friends cannot wait to comment on the numbers as you just laid them out. We have another call. American Samoa on the board tonight. And there is your projected winner in American Samoa, the former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg. A decisive victory over, we are led to believe, Tulsi Gabbard, a resident of the Pacific Rim, at 29%. We're going to regroup, gather ourselves as we look at the delegate board tonight. A break in our coverage. We're coming right back. We'll hear from Nicole Wallace. We'll hear from Robert Gibbs. We'll hear from David Plouffe. We'll hear from Claire McCaskill. There are the numbers. We are back, and just to review, I can't overemphasize how cautious we are on projected winners. I can't underemphasize how overwhelming the indications need to be to call a state at the moment the polls close, as we did tonight in North Carolina for Joe Biden, as we have tonight in the Commonwealth of Virginia for Joe Biden. At that same hour, we called the home state for Bernie Sanders. That's where our discussion was right up until Mike Bloomberg won American Samoa.
American Samoa meeting today. With the time difference, we didn't know exactly when we were going to get those results. A handful of delegates at stake. Mike Bloomberg wins. It looks like Tulsi Gabbard maybe in second place there.
Yeah.
As goes American Samoa, so goes... Yeah, I don't know. But we've got those results. Robert Gibbs, we wanted to make sure that we got your reaction to the way that Steve was describing what's going on in Virginia, watching that suburban vote coming in, watching sort of the scale of Biden's victory there.
I think that's what's going to be fascinating in those two states. Certainly, Biden is buoyed by that larger African-American vote, the strength of it. But winning in those suburban Richmond counties, winning in Northern Virginia, our report at Cameron Village Regional Library, a stone's throw from my alma mater at NC State in Raleigh, is in the middle of the types of neighborhoods, suburban neighborhoods, that are crucial in a swing state in a general election. Those are the places where the congressional candidates that took seats from Republicans in 2018 did well, and where somebody's going to have to do well in 2020 to be the next president of the United States. And if that vote is starting to coalesce and pick somebody, that suburban college-educated vote that hasn't really gone to either Sanders or Biden to this point, it could be a huge, huge development. And I think a decent part of it is when you're running fourth and fifth in Iowa and New Hampshire, the electability argument is out the window. You look like a giant killer in South Carolina, you project that electability strength, and then all of a sudden, it's not just the momentum, it's not just the endorsements, but people think you can be a winner. And I wonder how much that's playing into people's minds right now, going into those suburban districts and making that choice.
But the message has also changed going into South Carolina and going into tonight. For the week between Nevada and South Carolina, for the first time, Bernie Sanders' record on guns and health care were an issue that was marketed to voters in those states. They went to the polls hearing a real contrast between Biden and Sanders around guns. Those are the kinds of issues that turn suburban, especially suburban women,
Absolutely.
in a general election,
and if you think about it, just 2 weeks ago in North Carolina, the day before this network's debate, Bloomberg in a poll was in first in North Carolina. Sanders was in second. Biden was in third. Yeah. Boy, I mean, it's changed a lot in 48 hours, but in 2 weeks, we've really seen the blunting of any growth by Mike Bloomberg. As you said, the beginning of the contrast on that record with Bernie Sanders, and now the strength of Biden come through. It'll be interesting to watch this throughout the night.
Pete Buttigieg, too, was the first person who started making this argument part of his public messaging when I think he was with Chris Matthews in the spin room after a debate, and he said, you know, I'm talking to all of these candidates who won in the midterms about what they need and what they want, and they don't want to run on a revolution. Joe Biden picked up not just the endorsement, but this message and has been projecting it. And if you look at sort of the trauma that I think a lot of Democratic primary voters feel about the 3 years of the Trump presidency, they don't want to just win the White House. Right. They want to send Mitch McConnell into the minority.
Let me bring Claire McCaskill into this conversation. Claire, looking at poll closing calls in Vermont, Senator Sanders' home state, but also in Virginia, in North Carolina, both for Joe Biden, both of those poll closing calls implying that these are big wins. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, it is remarkable that Joe Biden has done what he has done in Virginia with one field office. One field office. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, nobody wins a state with one field office. I think he went to Virginia one time. So this clearly something is happening organically here. And I think maybe the most damaging thing to Bernie Sanders before this evening is over, depending on how it all plays out, is his narrative may get blown up, that he is driving turnout, that he is driving a new surge of voters. If, in fact, we have these lines all over, and if Biden is winning these states, then it's going to get flipped. It would be that Biden is driving turnout, and not Bernie. And that may be more damaging than even his inability to gather enough delegates tonight to step into a, an absolute ironclad frontrunner status.
It's a double-edged sword, though, isn't it, Claire? Because obviously Senator Sanders' theory of the case is that he can turn out young voters and first-time voters, and we are not seeing, I mean, we'll have to wait till we get it from all states, but so far we're not seeing a big surge of young voters. But broadly speaking, the Democratic Party wants to be driving as much young voter turnout as they can. It's not just a Senator Sanders-specific argument. Democrats need young voters to turn out. That's how we got Barack Obama in 2008, how we got him reelected in 2012 to a certain extent. I mean, the Democrats need Senator Sanders' theory of the case to come true for the party.
We need Bernie Sanders supporters. We need African-American voters. We need those suburban women who don't like Trump but have never really called themselves Democrats. We need all of them. And the thing that strikes me, Rachel, is that a frontrunner tries to bring everybody to his case. A frontrunner doesn't demonize the other side. A frontrunner is busy trying to build bridges and bring everyone's supporters to their cause. And the more Bernie calls Joe Biden, who hasn't been able to, I think he came in 4th in fundraising. That's the corporate establishment has not funded Joe Biden. The more he demonizes all the people that supported any of these people, the harder it is for him to really claim any kind of frontrunner status mantle.
Claire McCaskill, thank you. Looking at 7 minutes until our next round of poll closings, 8 o'clock Eastern time, a bunch of them. We'll take a break now so we can come back uninterrupted and be here for the top of the hour. Welcome back, and in about 3 minutes, we're looking at Alabama, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, and Maine. Alabama takes on an extra kind of significance tonight because of the trend we've seen. And our man in Bessemer, Alabama tonight is Tremaine Lee, looking to see if Biden can thread the needle across the South. Hey, Tremaine.
Hey, Brian. So I'm here in Bessemer, which is about 20 minutes outside of Birmingham, and I've been talking to voters all day about what went into their decision in terms of who they were voting for. And a couple themes emerged. One, it was after almost 4 years of Donald Trump, a sense of normalcy. Let's get back to normal, steady the ship. But the other was decency. And people said it time and again, they wanted a decent candidate to go up against Donald Trump. And when I asked folks about whether Joe Biden's win in South Carolina and whether all of the endorsements that flooded in after South Carolina mattered to them, they said most definitely. It reassured them of their decision. But when I asked them about James Clyburn in particular, that speech he gave introducing Joe Biden, when he said this is a good man, here in Alabama, 55 years after, almost to the date of Bloody Sunday, when people were beaten bloody on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, those were good men and good women to these folks in this state. Let's not forget, 55 years, we are among a generation of black people who really are the first to have their right to vote legally sanctioned. That's not lost on folks here. And so when they talk about this sense of normalcy and decency and steadying the ship, the fingers point towards Joe Biden. Now, I talked to a bunch of folks, still a small sample size, but they said it came down to Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders mostly. They had one Bloomberg, but Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, and they said they felt best with Joe Biden. Small sample size, but this is what the folks are saying, Brian.
Thanks for giving us something we can improve on, Tremaine Lee, with an enormous bit of reporting and eloquence from Bessemer, Alabama.
I also just want to reiterate one little piece of news that we touched on earlier, which is that we had earlier in the night expected that one of the poll closings at 8 o'clock Eastern is going to be Tennessee. We are not going to be making any sort of call in Tennessee, regardless of what the numbers are, because there have been some polls that have been extended because of the deadly tornadoes in Tennessee. And so because of polls being extended in Davidson County, also some large sort of hub election sites being held open even further than an additional hour, there will not be a call at the 8 o'clock, what had previously been the 8 o'clock poll closing, no matter what numbers we get in from the state. So just to avoid confusion there, we're looking at numbers and potentially calls now from Alabama, Maine, Massachusetts, and Oklahoma.
And any other given night on this network, we would be talking about the horrendous loss of life in the Nashville metropolitan area. But of course, this is our lead story tonight while we keep them in our thoughts. Coming up on 10 seconds now, again, Maine, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, Alabama are our closings. It's 8 o'clock Eastern time. Let's get going. And it looks like, to Tremaine's message he was receiving from voters about normalcy, about decency, voters in Alabama have delivered for Joe Biden, the projected winner at poll closing. Massachusetts, too early to call.
Ow.
You see there your top two leaders. Oklahoma, too early to call. And in the great state of Maine, all the way up north, too early to call. Quick reminder how they stack up so far tonight. We called North Carolina for Joe Biden at poll closing. We called the Commonwealth of Virginia for Joe Biden at poll closing. We called the state of Vermont for favorite son, local man, Bernie Sanders. The delegates earned tonight the commanding lead of Joe Biden, with the proviso that it's early yet. The delegates earned thus far this primary and caucus season for the Democrats. See above proviso. The numbers are impressive. Steve Kornacki has more of them at the big board. Steve, throw Alabama on the pile.
We have been talking about the black vote looking a lot tonight like it did in South Carolina. Alabama, this is going to have the largest black population of any state tonight. You heard the call for Biden. 44% in Alabama, African-American tonight. 72% of them going for Joe Biden. Nearly half the electorate. He's getting more than 70% of the vote from black voters in Alabama. This an overwhelming. Looks like it's on pace to be bigger than what we're looking at in North Carolina and Virginia. Just when you look at this, something else significant we're seeing. You mentioned in Massachusetts, no call in that race at poll closing time. We haven't had that in the South so far. Take a look at what we're seeing here in Massachusetts. I'll break down by gender in Massachusetts. So first of all, among men, 44% of the electorate. You see Sanders leading here. Look at this, by the way. You see Biden at 30%. Excuse me. Let me just get this right. I see Biden here twice. I want to make sure I'm getting this correct. Warren is 19 here. Is that correct, Adam? I'm asking my producer this. The key I wanted to tell you, yes, Warren is at 19. This would be 36 Sanders, 30 Biden, and 19 for Warren. And if you look at women in Massachusetts, check this out. You see Biden 28, Warren 30. So first of all, you see a gender gap, but I think the most significant thing you see in this exit poll is that Joe Biden is 30% with men and 28% with women. In other words, he is way over that 15% threshold. Just a couple of days ago, there was a poll in Massachusetts, and he was running at 11%. At 11%, Joe Biden was going to get 0 delegates out of Massachusetts. Running at 28, 30, anywhere in that range, he's going to be collecting delegates from Massachusetts. What is coming into focus? When you look at the call we had in North Carolina, in Virginia, in North Carolina, in Alabama, and when you look at the scale of the victory that Joe Biden is racking up in those states, there's the potential from those 3 states alone for Joe Biden to net something like 100 delegates over Sanders, meaning his cumulative margin in those states over Sanders and delegates could end up being something around 100. Biden leading Sanders by 100 delegates coming out of those 3 states alone, with an opportunity for Biden to add to that in Tennessee and Arkansas, states with some similar demographics. It was an open question a week ago if Biden was going to be able to get even as many delegates as Bernie Sanders in these states. Instead, looks like he's due for a massive haul out of here. And then when you see Biden making the delegate threshold in Massachusetts, potentially being well over that threshold in Massachusetts, it tells you, first of all, he's not going to get shut out of delegates. That was looking like a possibility the other day. It also looks like there's a potential there. Maybe Biden wins it, maybe Sanders wins it, maybe Warren wins Massachusetts, but if they're bunched together, no one's getting a clear delegate advantage out of Massachusetts. Maybe one wins it by 5 delegates, maybe the other wins it by 5 delegates. Maine, Vermont, coming out of New England, Sanders, if you got close races in Maine and Massachusetts and just Vermont, Sanders is netting 10, 20, 25 delegates out of New England, falling behind by over 100 in the South. We said at the start of the night, a dream scenario for Biden on what was supposed to be Sanders' big night. Dream scenario for Biden is he leads in total delegates at the end of the night. We are, 2 hours into our broadcast? It is more possible now that will be the case than it was when we came on.
Steve Kornacki, can I ask you a clarifying question about the Massachusetts results? When
yes.
Brian did the call there, he described the NBC projection as too early to call, and then we got a picture of Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden for Massachusetts.
Yes.
Obviously, Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren's home state, and the numbers you were just showing, at least in terms of the gender breakdown, it looks like Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren was holding her own there. Is she in contention there, or was that a signal?
Yeah, no, you can. I mean, you can see. Look, the electorate here can try to do this math yourself here, but you see the electorate here. It's a little bit more than 50. It's 56% female. You see, Warren is in the exit poll leading that slightly. It's just there is that gender gap, and I apologize. This graphic is confusing, but Warren. Okay, it's been fixed now. Warren running back at 19%. What you're seeing again, Biden 30 and 28 between those two groups. So Sanders benefiting more from male support, Warren benefiting more from female support, Biden kind of threading the needle there, doing well with both groups. And I think if you do the math, at least you see in the exit poll, maybe Biden and Sanders a little bit up on Warren there, but we will see as the results come in.
And again, the projection there, too early to call, fascinating. That's obviously important for Senator Warren because that's her home state. Also interesting, we get a call at closing time from Alabama that for Vice President Biden. We don't get calls. It's also too early to call in Maine and in Oklahoma. If my memory serves, those are both states that Senator Sanders won in 2016 over Hillary Clinton. He was 64-36 in the Maine caucuses. And in Oklahoma, he won by 10 points in 2016. But in both of those states, we've got too early to call at this point. Fascinating slew of results. Let's bring into the conversation now the beloved Reverend Al Sharpton. It is great to have you here, Rev, president of the National Action Network, the host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC. You were just in Alabama, were you not?
That's right.
What do you make of this poll closing call?
I'm not surprised. I think that I've been saying all along that if you go into states that have diversity, Biden was always a favorite. And I think a lot of it has to do with his work with Barack Obama. But I think a lot of it was also accelerated by what happened in South Carolina. And what I think we're seeing tonight, and I think you or Brian mentioned it, is that the surge of young voters has not happened so far. The night is early. And the turnout seems to be more Biden in the states that we've seen than we've seen of Sanders. And I think a lot of us were buying into what ends up now looking like some political talk or projections by one camp rather than the reality. As I traveled around the country, a lot of people were saying they want stability. With the coronavirus, don't underestimate the impact that could be of in the middle of this disaster, and you're looking at a president that starts by calling it a hoax and now is still fumbling. A lot of that are in people's minds as they went to vote today. And so far tonight is a huge night for Joe Biden.
Let me ask you about Senator Sanders in the South. I mean, one of the things that seems very positive for Senator Sanders is obviously he's been the national frontrunner. So also, he seems to have been really improving his standing among Latino voters. That said, he got crushed by Hillary Clinton in the South in 2016. He ran basically equal with her everywhere else in the country except in the South, where she just shellacked him. That hasn't changed. I mean, he just got walloped in South Carolina by 30 points with the best turnout yet. He has been walloped, apparently, tonight in Virginia and in North Carolina and in Alabama with these poll closing calls, which means it's not going to be close in any of those states. I mean, I thought that Senator Sanders was adding to his likability and to sort of his range by really turning it up with Latino voters. But we're not seeing any sign of that at all in the South and among black voters in particular.
We're not seeing that at all. And I think we must remember, even in Nevada, Rachel, which was a caucus, by the way, not a primary, he lost the black vote in Nevada. He lost the black vote, where he did very well with Latino voters. I think people misunderstand that a lot of people in the African-American community are a lot more conservative on some issues than they are on racial issues, and that they miss that when you look at the breakdown of their opinions on certain things. And I think Joe Biden is closer to that with a lot of people I talk to. I'm probably further left than a lot of blacks in the South. And it's not only because I'm from the North, but it's just the way this landscape is in the country, and I think we don't really have a feel for it.
Do African-American voters turning out at every age group and across the gender divide for Joe Biden signal something nationally? I mean, we talk all the time at 4 o'clock about how, you know, if you oppose Donald Trump from a policy perspective or you're offended by the rule of law, that's nothing compared to feeling targeted or feeling with the immigration policies and the whole bucket of issues just seem to be more urgently felt in diverse communities in diverse states. Do you think that that is just something that we've sort of paid less attention to than we should have? I mean, the writing's been on the wall in every poll. Biden's been on top of every poll in South Carolina and in southern states for almost a year.
Because you're not discriminated against based on age. And when you're dealing with people that have been shut out or failed discriminated, whether you're young or old, you want to fight that. And I think that a lot of people saw a generation gap that was more acute in their mind than it was in reality. Now, there are differences between young blacks and older blacks. There's a lot different between me and my daughters. But it doesn't mean that we would not go in politically to say we want to see the same kinds of things to confront the inequality and the institutional bigotry that we have to face. And you face it because of the color of your skin.
Rev, let's mirror a brief conversation we had during the break. Tonight, we're missing our mutual friend, who I'd never normally describe as retiring, Chris Matthews. Chris liked, above all, destroying a political bromide, and he loved a political moment, which brings me to the endorsement in South Carolina in an era where we're not supposed to have kingmakers in our politics anymore. I think we disproved that.
I think that James Clyburn has an impeccable reputation across the board, even beyond his congressional district. And it meant a lot because you must remember, he endorsed him at a time when there was not all of the guarantees that Biden would do as well as he did. Right. It was a lot of risk. And for Clyburn to stand there and take that risk and say, this is a good man, he spoke to the hearts of a lot of people that trust him and that trust his judgment. And if you're going to run in South Carolina, I did. You want Jim Clyburn, if he's not going to endorse you, at least be nice to you. And it means a whole lot because he is the guy that in the South, I don't know anyone that has more stature than him, probably not in the Congress. He and Elijah Cummings were the two guys in the Congress that everybody related to. And I think that Clyburn deserves a lot of credit tonight.
It was 2 days after the Nevada caucuses. I mean, it was 2 days after Sanders, as Steve Kornacki keeps saying, looked like he might be steamrolling his way to the nomination.
It was 2 days after the whole world was saying that Bernie Sanders is going to roll this all the way through, and Clyburn stood in front of the storm and said, hold it a minute, I'm with this guy. And I think it took a lot of courage. We did a breakfast that morning, a minister's breakfast.
Right, that's right.
And of National Action Network. And when Clyburn walked in there, he told me on his way out, I'm announcing my endorsement. And it was a morning that people would say, why would he do that right after Nevada? But that's the kind of guy he is. That's why he's earned that kind of trust.
Can we talk for a second about Mike Bloomberg? Heading into Super Tuesday, he was the big black box. Nobody knows how he's going to affect this race. Nobody's ever run exactly in this way. Nobody's ever run with quite that big a truckload of money clearing the way for him. But so far, we've got results from Vermont, Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama. We've got too early to call in Maine, Massachusetts, and Oklahoma. We do have a Mike Bloomberg victory in American Samoa, but we don't have him placing, apparently, as of yet, in the top 2 in any of the other states that we've either got results from or that we're still watching. If this is going to be the kind of night that Mike Bloomberg has, and maybe somewhere other than American Samoa will turn out to be Bloomberg country, but if that's it, what happens to Mike Bloomberg in this race, Rev?
I think that Mike Bloomberg should keep his war chest there and help someone that can win. I think that he said he would spend up to $1 billion, no matter who the winner was, and I think he ought to start preparing. We'll see what happens the rest of the night, but preparing to start doing some money transfers.
You know what I've been imagining? A meeting convened by the Reverend Al Sharpton between Mike Bloomberg and Democratic Party likely nominee Bernie Sanders.
Listen to you stirring things up.
Yeah. Senator Sanders is still one of the 2 frontrunners at this point. We don't know how things are going to go. California is going to be huge. Texas is going to be huge for him. We'll see. If he ends up fighting to the death with Joe Biden, it looks like Bernie's going to pull it out, and he's going to be the nominee. He's the only candidate in the Democratic field who said, I don't want Mike Bloomberg's money. Oh, he wants to get Donald Trump out of the White House. I'd rather not have it than than give up any benefit that he's going to give me. Does somebody like you, who knows everybody in the Democratic Party, does somebody who has good faith a good faith reputation and is a good negotiator who has credit with all sides, step in then to try to undo that, to try to make sure that Bloomberg's money still runs?
I don't know if I'm no person, but I think somebody should say that the goal is to try to save this country and bring it back to a level of decency and the standard of the presidency where it's respectable. And that argument should be made if we get to that point.
I think you'd be the best one to make it, I'm just saying.
Seems like you two should talk offline. Rev, thank you for stopping by our conversation.
Great to have you here.
Appreciate it. Now to our human delegate calculator, one David Clough, standing by. David, where are we?
Well, I want to start by saying, we've talked about, wow, just 3 or 4 days ago, Joe Biden was trailing in North Carolina. We had dead seats in Virginia. How can he win? Let's remember, in politics, it's always easier for a candidate to win back vote they lost that they never had. So when Biden was performing poorly in debates in Iowa and New Hampshire, a lot of his support, African-American voters primarily, parked in undecideds. Once he showed strength, they came back to him. And none of the other candidates in the field, Rachel talked about Bernie Sanders struggled with the African-American community, was able to build support there. So where we are from a delegate standpoint is it's a dream night for Joe Biden so far. This was a night I thought he needed to survive even after South Carolina. He may end up thriving. So he's going to end as we get into the Midwestern and Western part of the night, with a delegate advantage. Steve Kornacki in the last hour mentioned if you're Joe Biden, you actually don't want Mike Bloomberg or Elizabeth Warren to reach viability in Virginia or North Carolina because you will net more delegates. This is how crazy the delegate system is. Joe Biden may, when we get to California, be hoping that Bloomberg and Warren, or at least one of them, is viable to keep Bernie Sanders' delegate yield down in California. So it's going as good as Joe Biden could have ever imagined. And again, it's worth, like Virginia, you've got the Washington, D.C. media market. You've got Tidewater, Richmond. It's a big state, North Carolina. These are expensive states. Joe Biden is racking up delegates with no money. Little organization, no staff. And so he's benefiting from his national poll leader position in the race. He held almost all of 19. He lost it for a few weeks. Now he's getting it back. And I think if you're the Biden campaign, you look ahead to March 10th, March 17th, March 24th. Can I put money in organization together with the momentum and to take a delegate lead that he might never lose?
And Steve Kornacki, as speaking of upending political bromides, having one field office and winning a state certainly does that and puts on its ear the usual argument about ground game.
That field office covered a lot of ground because you are seeing it from Virginia Beach and Norfolk to Richmond and its suburbs to the Washington, D.C. suburbs down to Southwest Virginia. This map is looking like South Carolina. It's almost every county here, Biden blue. And look, you've basically got 2/3 of the vote in, and this 30-point margin for Joe Biden is holding. Our decision desk has not allocated all of the delegates here. But again, if something like this holds, you're looking at Biden getting like 70 delegates out of Virginia. You're looking at Sanders getting like 29. Our decision desk has projected that Sanders will get some delegates. But again, the hope for Sanders here was to get the most delegates out of Virginia. And look, if Biden's getting something like that out of here, Sanders has one big win tonight. It's his home state. He's winning this thing by a similar margin. But what would this translate to? This would be something like 12-4. So maybe Sanders would net like 8 out of here. Meanwhile, he's losing 40 in Virginia. And what's happening in Virginia is happening in North Carolina and Alabama and could happen all across the South.
I have a request. At some point, can you put together a map of counties, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia? I'd love to see how that looks.
Everything together.
Tonight.
Give it a shot.
If that breaks the big board, we're going to have to pick up a collection.
This is why we can't have nice things. We're not even halfway there yet on a huge night of results. Don't forget, Arkansas closes at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break now. We'll come back with that uninterrupted. Welcome back. In these next few minutes, we have another poll closing. But first, we have pictures of the long lines, first in East L.A. and then in Sacramento, California, with folks taking this primary election day seriously. Remember, California is not usually in the money on Super Tuesday. So this is a huge opportunity for the 40 million Americans.
Can I also
who
just say
live there.
we
you
have
can say whatever you wish. Well,
we have seen reports tonight of long lines, seemingly for different reasons in different states all over the country. I would just say, if you are in line to vote, if you are waiting in line, if you are considering whether or not to get in that line, your country needs you. Thank you for going out and voting. Thank you for sticking with it. If you are standing in line right now and you've got stuff to do and you're worried maybe this is going to be for naught because the polls are going to close before I get to the front of the line, that's not true. If you are in line, you will be allowed to vote. And if anybody tries to tell you different, have them call me. I mean, this is a moment where this is a really important election. This is a really important primary. You making the effort to vote means everything. It sucks in our country that it is so hard to vote. And that happens in Democratic-controlled states and Republican-controlled states, and sometimes it's inadvertent, and sometimes it's on purpose, which is evil. But if you are out voting, stick with it, and your country thanks you.
It also may be that after a long day at work, promotion, you're listening to us on Sirius XM satellite radio, and you're on your way to the polls, and you're wavering. To Rachel's point, the car knows where to go.
Get in line.
Alicia Menendez is in Beto O'Rourke's hometown of El Paso, Texas. Alicia, tell us what you've seen there today and tonight.
Brian, we have less than 40 minutes until polls close here in El Paso. We've been at this polling location all day speaking with voters. We spoke with one Sanders supporter who said she made her mind up weeks ago, but otherwise every single voter we've spoke with cast their vote for Joe Biden, and they made their mind up in the last few days. They say they were waiting to watch what happens in South Carolina, and the triumvirate of endorsements from O'Rourke, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar, many candidates they had considered voting for, put them over the edge. Remember, this is also a large Latino community. 85% of the population of this county is Latino. Just 7 months ago, this community was rocked when a white nationalist went on a shooting spree, leaving 22 dead, 24 injured. It's also a border town. We're just a few miles from Juarez, where the humanitarian crisis at our border is in sharp focus. And so the voters we spoke with said those issues might not be front of mind, but they have voters focused on one singular question: who can beat Donald Trump in November?
That's terrific
Brian?
Reporting from El Paso.
Yes, thank you.
Alicia, thank you for that.
We should mention there's some numbers on the side of the screen that you saw there from Texas. Even though most Texas polling places haven't closed, we do have the first numbers coming in from the slice of Texas that is in a different time zone than the other polling places that are still open. That's why you're seeing some early numbers.
They're real, raw numbers. They're publicly reportable. We're just holding off on any characterization we will make until all time zones have worked their way to the West. Donna Edwards is with us, former Maryland Democratic Congresswoman, these days a column writer for the Washington Post. Tell the folks watching what you said when you sat down with us.
Well, I think, you know, if you look at the vote that's taken place, first of all, of the voters, black voters in particular, who've been driving this in South Carolina, I started to get an idea of what was going to happen in North Carolina and states like Virginia, looking at the suburbs of South Carolina. They're the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. And those all went to Joe Biden. And that told me a lot. It's my home state. That told me a lot about what was going to happen in North Carolina.
Looking at the South Carolina results, some of those counties and towns that are essentially adjacent to North Carolina communities.
They're bedroom communities of Charlotte, North Carolina. And Charlotte, you know, a lot of highly educated voters, research, the financial sector. Banking. And those are the voters who are voting in North Carolina. And then I think you couple that with what has happened in Virginia, those Northern Virginia suburbs, and also Charlottesville. Those are voters who are Democrats. They're moderate Democrats, so it's not a surprise to me. Look, I'm a progressive, and I love, you know, voting progressive. But I know that in order to, you know, to win a national election, we have to figure out a way that we pull all of this together. And who pulls that under the tent?
Were you at all shy about that conclusion that you started to come through watching South Carolina, knowing about the kinds of money that was spent in North Carolina? I mean, Bloomberg over $12 million in the state, Sanders nearly $2 million in the state, Biden's under $300,000 in North Carolina. Nevertheless, he gets a poll closing definitive call that he's going to be the projected winner there.
Well, part of it is that, you know, especially some of the black voters that we're talking about, a third of the, or a quarter of the electorate in North Carolina, those are voters who want to vote for somebody they trust, and also they want to cast a vote for somebody who's going to win. And I think South Carolina told them that, and you can see that projected all through the South, and I think we're going to see it across the country tonight.
Here's what's going to happen. You've got the counter in the corner of your screen. We're going to listen into Mike Bloomberg for a bit, and then we have a call. We have a poll closing in Arkansas at the bottom of the hour.
Florida leaders supporting our campaign, including Mayors Manny Diaz, Phil Levine, Bob Buckhorn, Keith James, and Congress members Ted Deutsch and Stephanie Murphy. Let's hear it for them. Now, it's great to be here in this beautiful state. I know you're not used to seeing a New Yorker in southern Florida in late winter. But unlike the president, I didn't come here to golf. Or to reveal classified information to Mar-a-Lago members. I came here because winning in November starts with Florida. And if I'm the nominee, let me make you this promise. We will beat Donald Trump here in Florida and in swing states around the country. Now, tonight the polls are still open in a number of Super Tuesday states. And as the results come in, here's what is clear. No matter how many delegates we win tonight, we have done something no one else thought was possible. In just 3 months, we've gone from 1%
It is
of the polls
8:30 Eastern Time, and you'll note we're just bringing this in from the side because we only have 1% in, and in Arkansas, the result is too early to call. Please note Biden with 59% of that 1%, Bloomberg with 22% of the 1%. We'll go back and listen to Mike Bloomberg, who is, fair to say, not having the night he thought he paid for, not having the night he was hoping for.
And to start rebuilding our country and to start getting things done. And I mean big, important things like stopping gun violence and fighting climate change, and finally achieving affordable health coverage for all Americans. This is a campaign for change, a campaign for sanity, for honesty, a campaign for inclusion, compassion, competence, and a campaign for human decency. And this is a campaign to bring our country back together and put the United back in the United States of America. That's the message I've been delivering not only to Democrats, but also to swing voters who will actually decide who will be our next president. And tonight, we proved something very important. We proved we can win the voters who will decide the general election. And isn't that what this is all about? Now, while my fellow candidates spent a whole year focusing on the first 4 states, I was out campaigning against Donald Trump in the states where the election will actually be decided, like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pittsburgh and Ohio and North Carolina and, of course, Florida. President Obama proved that a Democrat can win all of those states, but in 2016, we lost them all. Well, I'm running to win them back. And together, we're going to get it done. Now, we all know Trump's strategy: attack Democrats, make their plans look unrealistic, unaffordable, and undoable. That won't work against us. Our plans are sensible, workable, and achievable, and we have the record and the resources to defeat Trump in swing states the Democrats lost in 2016, like Florida. I know we can do it, and you know who else knows it? Donald Trump. And that's why he keeps attacking us on Twitter. Today, he sent a tweet out urging people not to vote for us. Gee, I wonder why. Clearly, Trump is scared stiff of facing us, and for good reason. In every campaign I ran for mayor, we built a broad coalition that brought Democrats and independents and moderate Republicans together. Donald Trump the other day called me short. I said, Donald, where I come from, we measure people from the neck up. That's how we're going to beat Donald Trump. I believe we need a leader who is ready to be commander-in-chief, not college debater-in-chief. So if you want someone who talks turkey and who has a record of accomplishment on all the big issues facing our country and who has the resources to beat Trump, I'm your guy. And while Trump tweets, I follow facts, respect data, and tell the truth. My whole career, I have been a doer, and I believe we need less talk, less partisanship, less division, less tweeting. In fact, how about no tweeting from the Oval Office ever again? Now, you've all heard our campaign slogan, Mike will get it done. Well, let me tell you what the it is. It means winning this November and sending Donald Trump back to Mar-a-Lago permanently.
We are back in the studio. We've been watching Mike Bloomberg in West Palm down in Florida, where the contest is part of another big night, March 17th. And we thought right about now would be a good time to ask Steve Kornacki. I just read our friend Rick Wilson says Joe-mentum is real tonight, so we've established that. What about Mike-mentum? How good, how bad a night is the billionaire former mayor of New York City having?
Couple ways to look at this. First of all, you can see the delegate count here. And remember, you're seeing these big wins for Biden in big states. The count you're seeing right here, and it just went up, by the way, a lot of those delegates in those states have yet to be allocated formally by our decision desk. So in the next hour or so, you can expect that Biden number to keep growing. Where do you see Bloomberg? He's got 4 from American Samoa. That's what he's got to show for Super Tuesday so far. One way of looking at this, we can take Virginia, where almost all the results are in now, 93%. It continues to be 54-23, and you can see a couple things. Yeah, a couple things to point out.
30-point margin?
31.
Good Lord.
This is like South Carolina last week, where you want to talk about how fast this thing changed, how fast this moved in the direction of Joe Biden. Just the other day, poll there, 26 for Sanders, 24 for Joe Biden. Tonight, 26-23, poll got Sanders about right, 30 points off for Biden. What happened? This is a big part of what happened. The fact that Bloomberg tonight is checking in at 10%, well under threshold in the state, threshold to get delegates. It just looks like, you say Mike-mentum, it looks like Mike-mentum of 2 weeks ago became Joe-mentum. That Joe Biden, after Nevada, when he got hot in South Carolina, when he won South Carolina, that whole theory that was out there that, hey, Bloomberg, if his supporters went somewhere else, it might be to Biden. You start to look at results like this in Virginia, and that's what you start to see. Now, where else would we see it? Take a look down here in North Carolina. Right now, you see 35% reporting. Bloomberg is sitting there at 17%. That would be over threshold. Here's a really interesting real-time experiment you can follow. This 35% you're seeing in North Carolina, that is overwhelmingly early vote. In other words, votes that were cast before South Carolina, votes that were cast before the Joe-mentum era began. And you can see in that period, Biden was running about 32, Bloomberg about 17. See how those numbers change when the same-day vote comes in Carolina.
Steve Kornacki, am I allowed to ask you a follow-up question on race?
Yeah.
On South Carolina and Virginia, what proportion of the electorate in those two states is African-American on these two election nights? Are they roughly equivalent? Since I'm asking because we're seeing roughly similar margins for South Carolina and for Virginia.
Show you, they're not, is the short answer. I can show you the reason for that. In South Carolina, the number was 56%. 56% of the electorate was black. It's basically half that in Virginia. You're looking at 27%. What is the other piece of the equation in Virginia? It's what we talked about in 2018 and what we've been talking about for 2 years. Suburban voters, suburban white voters. I mean, the biggest county in the state, right here, Fairfax County, right in the D.C. suburbs. And there it is. Joe Biden, 52, Sanders, 23, Bloomberg, 12. I didn't see any Fairfax County-specific polling, but I bet a couple weeks ago, if you took a poll in Fairfax County, this number was a lot lower. This number was a lot higher. For that matter, this number was a lot higher. There really has, when you look at Virginia and you look at the polling we saw until South Carolina, there is a lot of persuasive evidence of consolidation around Biden and a ceiling for Sanders.
So the story of Joe Biden's success in the South, as told as of this point, is a story of African-American voters. It is also a story of suburban voters.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Unbelievable. All right, we're going to take another break. Don't forget that at the top of this next hour, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, we have a big poll closing deep in the heart of Texas. These are live pictures of the lines to vote at one polling place in Austin, Texas. We will go there live.
Stay in line. Do not give up. Stay in line. Your vote will count.
You can all drive out to the Salt Lick for some quality barbecue, but you have to vote first. Look at that line.
It's inspiring, and it's also infuriating that people have to work that hard to vote.
Yeah, but the athleticism of our camera crews has to be admired. We'll be back with more right after this. We've had these partial Texas results available, publicly reported on the screen, but of course, we can't make a characterization until the last of the polls close in the great state of Texas, which is not until the top of this next hour. We went to the break showing you the lines to vote at a polling location in Austin, Texas, which is, of course, the seat of Travis County. Chris Jansing has been there talking to voters all the while. Hey, Chris.
The lines here are insane, Brian. As you know, I have been going to polling places on election nights many more years than I care to admit. This line goes all the way down there. They've got a guy who's in a chair there. They cut people off, 45 minutes ago. But look, I'm going to walk as fast as my cameraman can walk backwards. It just goes on and on and on. People have been waiting as long as 3 hours to vote here already here in Travis County. And I just got off the phone with officials here. They have far exceeded what they saw 4 years ago. 230,000 people total. They're at 254 now. And this isn't the only place where there are long lines. We're told elsewhere in this county, elsewhere in Harris County, the other big county, there are lines like this where they are hours long. Now, see a college crowd like this? You see a big turnout. Conventional wisdom is it's great for Bernie Sanders. The asterisk has been, would people change their minds at the last minute? I can tell you, the other polling place I just came from, fully a third of people made up their minds in the last 24 hours. 3 people told me they didn't know who they were voting for. There were just 2 young women back there. They didn't want to go on television who told me they didn't know who they were going to vote for. They wanted to know how long the line was. In other words, how long did they have to make up their mind? How long have you guys been waiting in line?
2 hours, almost 2 hours.
Is it worth it?
Of course it's worth it. Civic engagement.
Yeah. How long would you be willing to wait in line?
As long as it takes.
Yeah. And that's pretty much what I got at the end of the line, too. People say they're willing to wait as long as it takes. Just before I came on here, Brian, finally, here's where... They're getting cheers for being on television back there. This is finally the line that goes inside the entrance to voting. I just got off the phone with the folks at the state Democratic Party. They say, given these lines that they're seeing in just a few pockets of places around the state, they may not say exactly what the final count is until midnight local time, which is 1 a.m. your time. And then you have that whole thing about how to apportion delegates, which can get very dicey. And they say until they have 100% of the vote in or something very close, they aren't willing to do that. Just a quick reminder before I throw it back to you that, as we've seen before, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders fought it out here, but the winner of the popular vote did not get the most delegates, and so they're going to be very careful. They're counting very carefully. They literally have closed the door on what they call the war room at the state Democratic Party and are waiting for final results from places like this at the University of Texas. Brian?
I have three things to say. Number one, hook 'em horns. Number two, what could go wrong? Number three, Chris, you've been absolved from any time on the hotel treadmill tomorrow. Chris Jansing in Austin, Texas for us tonight with the world's longest line to vote.
Thank you. It is awesome to see all those young, first of all, Austin and Texas as a whole is amazing. It's great to see all those people lined up. It's particularly kids lined up, young people lined up to vote when they don't know who they're going to vote for, but they're just there to make sure that they're going to figure it out by the time they're at the front of the line. I love it. But it is also an outrage. It is an outrage that it is this hard to cast a vote in this country. And I know it is not only Texas, but in Texas specifically, over successive electoral cycles over the past 10 years, the Republican-led government in Texas has made it harder and harder and harder to vote, not only in terms of the kind of documentation you have to show when you get there, but also they have been closing precincts. They've been closing voting places systematically, particularly in places that have high minority, young people, and poor people turnout. And so some of this is deliberate. And I will say you see, spikes in voter turnout some places and you get long lines. And it is more inspiring than infuriating because nobody tried to make this situation happen. But in some places in the country, and I believe Texas is one of them, it is because the state government wants it to be hard to vote. And it's wrong. And it should not take that much heroism and that much sacrifice to do your civic duty.
I was just watching the camera now reach the end of the line in Austin. I didn't mean to be staring out into the abyss. The home of 29 million of our fellow citizens, all in one great state. Steve Kornacki at the board with Texas Numbers.
As the voting continues out there, we have quite a few vote returns now in Texas. So let me tell you what you're looking at, and it just updated there. You see 15% reporting. You are looking at early vote. There's a lot of early vote taking place in Texas, and you see in the early vote that's tabulated so far, there's Mike Bloomberg, 20%. He'd be getting delegates. He'd be getting an awful lot of delegates with 20%. But the question to ask right now, again, when you see early vote tonight anywhere, you are looking at pre-South Carolina vote. This is a snapshot of what Texas looked like a week ago, 10 days ago, before the political world, before the world of this race changed. And in that world, Mike Bloomberg was running at 20%. Take a look here. We're getting early vote out of Dallas County. This is like 10% of the state. We just showed you Fairfax County in Virginia. We showed you Northern Virginia. This is another one of those places where you had suburbanites who flocked to the Democratic Party, gave them that blue wave in 2018. And you're seeing here Biden, very little of the same day starting to come in here. You see Biden narrowly leading Bloomberg at 20. What happens when we start getting the same day? Does this Bloomberg number drop? Does this Warren number drop? Does this Biden number start to rise? You're going to look for that, too, down here in the biggest county of the state, Harris County. Again, you're looking at all early vote right here. You're looking at Biden narrowly edging out Sanders, but Bloomberg well over 20%. This is what Texas looked like 10 days ago. The question is it what Texas looks like tonight, or has there been a big change? That's what the same-day vote's going to tell us.
Steve Kornacki, the Biden campaign said on Saturday night, they said again tonight, that their definition of success in the state of Texas is to do well in Dallas and Houston. Why would that be? Can you talk about that strategy?
Let's take a look. Let's go right back and zoom in so I can get it. Take a look at Dallas County. Again, 10% of the state. We just talked about there in Northern Virginia, those sort of swing voters, those suburbanites, folks who have been big into the Democratic Party in the Trump era. This is where you find them in Texas. You find them down there in Houston. You find them in Dallas. Take a look what happened here in this county in 2016. Hillary Clinton crushed Bernie Sanders here, 71-28. And again, that word ceiling. I wasn't sure if we'd be talking about it with Bernie Sanders at this point, but when you start seeing something like this, Bernie Sanders at 25% right now, Bernie Sanders was at 28% in a two-way race 4 years ago. Now, with far more candidates, he's still sitting there at 25. So with the Biden campaign saying they're optimistic about Dallas, they're hopeful about Dallas, they're hopeful about Harris, it's because they are hoping that since South Carolina, in the new world of Democratic presidential politics, the folks who were poised to vote for Mike Bloomberg will instead be voting for Joe Biden. That some of the folks who were poised to vote for Elizabeth Warren will instead be voting for Joe Biden. And what really had been almost a three-way race here, three candidates over 20%, will in the same day vote become Biden moving up into the 30s, moving into a double-digit advantage over Sanders. And if Joe Biden can do that in Dallas County, if Joe Biden can do that down in Harris County, that's a quarter of the state. A quarter of the vote is from those two counties alone.
Wow. Steve Kornacki, thank you very much. Everything's big in Texas, including the implications of what voters do there tonight. Joining us now is Evan Smith. He's the CEO and co-founder of the Texas Tribune, which is a Texas institution but a national treasure. Mr. Smith, thank you so much for being with us. It's great to have you here tonight.
Thank you. Sure, happy to be here. Big night.
It is a big night, and we're watching these long lines of voters in certain precincts that we've got reporters at. What can you tell us from a sort of higher altitude view of what level of excitement there is about this primary in Texas today?
Well, there's enormous excitement about this race. Let me say, I heard you talking about the problems with long lines and why it's so difficult to vote. One of the things is we have 254 counties, and we have 254 election administrators. The voting system in Texas, Rachel, is a hot mess. And the problems you're seeing in Travis County, Austin, and Harris County, Houston, we're hearing reports of all kinds of problems around the state. That said, we had more than 2 million people vote in our 11-day early voting period, which ended last Friday. There is enormous enthusiasm in both parties, but particularly the Democratic Party, it appears, in this election cycle. And as you've said several times, that vote that we're seeing come in right now, that early vote, is really old news. It's pre-South Carolina. I am really eager to see what happens today. The results could look very different based on the last couple of days in Texas.
I feel like there's been a lot of national punditry about the Latino vote in the Democratic primary. And it's been a little bit facile and a little bit reductive. And we have seen Senator Sanders make great strides in terms of the way that he has tried to appeal and tried to build organizing efforts among Latino communities. But what should a national audience understand about the various Latino communities inside Texas and the types of appeal that the leading candidates might have for them?
Well, one thing about the Hispanic vote in Texas, in our experience over the last number of years, is that it is not monolithic. The assumption is that the Hispanic vote is like the Hispanic vote in California or the Hispanic vote in Nevada or the Hispanic vote somewhere else. The Hispanic vote in Texas tends to be a little bit more conservative, small c, not big C. Republicans tend to do well with Hispanic voters here to a degree that you don't see in a lot of other places. I don't necessarily think that Senator Sanders has a lock on the Hispanic vote in Texas the way he did, say, in Nevada. For one thing, the Castro brothers, Secretary Julian Castro obviously ran for president, got out of the race, supported Senator Warren, and his brother, Congressman Joaquin Castro, who has also supported Senator Warren, have been barnstorming South Texas, their home city of San Antonio, but also the Rio Grande Valley, hoping to get votes out for Senator Warren. I think she's the sleeper today. I'm curious to see where she lands. I think that she will do well in the Hispanic community and maybe take some of those votes away from Senator Sanders the way that he dominated in Nevada.
We have seen almost nobody make a major financial investment in Texas other than Mayor Bloomberg. And I feel like in a normal cycle, you can extrapolate a little bit from money spent towards results expected. It doesn't feel like that's the dynamic in Texas right now. Am I reading that right?
Well, you're correct that he spent a ton of money in Texas. I wish I could show you the amount of mail that we've all gotten from Mayor Bloomberg in the last couple of months. Oh, my goodness, the amount of money that was spent on that direct mail. But there's not really any reason to think, based on what we're seeing the last couple of days, that he is going to stay at that level that Steve Kornacki quoted a couple of minutes ago. The early vote is one thing. I think the dynamic of this race really has pivoted off of Saturday. Vice President Biden got very significant endorsements over the last couple of days. including Congresswoman Veronica Escobar in El Paso, State Senator Carol Alvarado in Houston, State Representative Jessica Gonzalez in Dallas. There's a consolidation happening, I think, over the last couple of days. I was skeptical, Rachel, honestly, coming into tonight, that Vice President Biden could overtake Senator Sanders if the early vote came in strong for Senator Sanders. Just numerically, it was a math problem for the vice president. But hearing Steve say that Joe Biden slightly beat Bernie Sanders in Dallas County, slightly beat Bernie Sanders in Harris County in the early vote, those are massive population centers. And now I'm beginning to think maybe Joe Biden's going to win Texas. We'll see when the votes come out.
Evan Smith, CEO and editor-in-chief of Texas Tribune. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And a break for our coverage. When we come back, we have a new characterization of an existing race. And don't forget, we have a Texas poll close coming up in just about 3 minutes.